Panting heavily, a blond boy declared that the level 67 Cerberus was the most difficult obstacle they had faced in the dungeon. As the formidable beast charged a massive fireball, the entire party braced for death. The dwarf warned the group that his defensive skills might not be enough to block the attack, but his expression of terror suddenly shifted to confusion. He drew their attention to a goblin-like figure walking alone toward the monster, casually licking a piece of wood. The adventurers were baffled by this sight, especially as the beast released its fiery attack. To their amazement, the goblin leapt toward the fireball with a smile, and with a single swing of its mace, completely vaporized the dragon. The party stood in stunned silence, staring at the charred stumps where the monster's legs used to be, unable to comprehend how a simple goblin could destroy such a powerful enemy. Suspecting a summon, the dwarf directed their gaze to the top of a cliff, where a young man stood watching with a peculiar grin, convincing them that he was the one controlling the creature. The scene then abruptly cuts to the protagonist in the real world, where he is struggling to carry a heavy sack of cement at a construction site. Far from being a powerful summoner, he is physically weak and views himself as the goblin of human society. While others are born with luck, wealth, or good looks, he feels trapped in a beginner-level existence with no talent and a chaotic life. As he worked, a colleague beside him asked if he had heard about Mr. Cha, a man rumored to have abandoned his job after unlocking a secret class in the game Gate of the Gods. An older worker noted that this virtual reality game had become incredibly hyped because its immersion was so deep that players often lost touch with reality. Despite being impoverished, the protagonist could still access this cutting-edge technology thanks to the widespread availability of PC cafes in Korea. With in-game currency holding significant real-world value, the game had fundamentally changed society. The protagonist used to find joy in that world, but in that moment, he was focused on executing his ultimate move. His ultimate technique turned out to be nothing more than striking a rock to extract 3 meager minerals. Clutching his head in disbelief, he lamented that his terrible stats and class were actually costing him money, making it impossible to even cover the rental cost of his VR capsule. He wondered bitterly where the fantasy life was, the one where he becomes a legendary hero surrounded by beautiful women, because his current reality felt more like a bad dream than a game called Gate of the Heavens. However, his luck seemed to turn when he stumbled upon a rare advanced healing crystal valued at over $300,000. He was in the middle of celebrating this life-changing find, even strangely licking the item in his excitement, when a voice interrupted him. Turning around, his attention was immediately drawn to the attractive woman speaking to him, specifically noticing her impressive physique. She complimented him, assuming that since she saw him there daily, he must be a skilled miner. She explained that her party was blocked by a massive boulder in a dungeon, and they lacked the specific skills to break it. Although he confessed that his mining level was actually quite low and insisted that the area be cleared of monsters first, the group's dwarf assured him they would provide protection. He found it ironic that a dwarf needed help with mining, but another party member quickly scolded him for stereotyping the race. He weighed the opportunity to gain experience and extra materials against the dangers of deep dungeon exploration, knowing that dying in the game carried a harsh penalty. His hesitation vanished, however, when the woman grabbed his arm. She praised his strong, muscular mining arms in a surprisingly flirtatious way, which completely flustered him and sealed the deal. Moments later, he found himself shaking with fear as he faced a level 7 gray wolf. Despite the monster's low level, his inability to grow stronger meant he was hopelessly outmatched. Just as the creature lunged to bite him, the woman shouted for him to get down. She unleashed a devastating fire spell that dealt massive damage, instantly vaporizing the pack. Revealed to be a level 39 mage named Catherine Lee, she rushed over to ask if he was hurt, leaving him relieved and grateful for the rescue. He was still reeling from the shock of seeing her destroy an entire wolf pack in a single blow. She leaned into the drama, acting cute and claiming she was terrified of losing him, insisting he stay right by her side in such a dangerous place. Her words made him blush furiously, sparking a glimmer of hope that he might finally find some romance within the game. Another party member, who was effortlessly fending off wolves with a whip, told him not to be so impressed. He explained that a high-level group like theirs wouldn't normally bother with such an easy dungeon, but a specific type of ore was blocking their path, one that only a skilled miner could break. He dismissively added that none of them had bothered learning the mining skill because they considered it a waste of time meant for idiots who preferred hitting rocks over leveling up. The protagonist took offense to the implication that he was a fool, realizing they viewed him with contempt. Determined not to let the insult slide, he stepped up and swung his pickaxe with full force, helicopter style, directly into the stone. The action only highlighted his total lack of combat skills, leaving him to chip away at the wall like a character in Minecraft while muttering about his helplessness. Meanwhile, the dwarf questioned if their intel was accurate, but the whip wielder insisted that the rewards hidden behind the obstacle would justify the effort, warning that they would be in trouble if this turned out to be a waste of time. As he smashed against the stone, the protagonist felt pathetic for risking his life and enduring bullying for mere pocket change. However, he resigned himself to the reality that this was just another job, no different from his construction work in the real world, and kept swinging. After a monotonous session of breaking rocks, the wall finally gave way to reveal a hidden dungeon. The group erupted in cheers, unable to believe they had actually discovered a secret golden gateway, an area usually packed with rare rewards or secret classes. However, the celebration was short-lived. When the idea of finding the dungeon together was mentioned, Catherine dropped her sweet persona and coldly asked what they meant by "we." Before the protagonist could process this shift, the man with the whip sneaked up behind him. Just as the miner was smiling about his changing luck, he was struck by a devastating surprise attack that drained 480 health points and left him gasping for air. Catherine remarked that it was ridiculous they had relied on a trash miner to locate the spot, but admitted that, at least, he had served his purpose. Catherine coldly explained that he shouldn't take it personally, but since they handled the combat while he only broke rocks, he had no right to the rewards. The protagonist immediately realized the truth. They had known about the hidden dungeon from the start and had always planned to kill him. Confirming his suspicions, the other man grabbed him by the hair, sneering that they never would have wasted time with trash like him unless they were certain of the payout. Before he could react, a final blow sent him flying through the air, spinning uncontrollably like a rag doll. When he finally opened his eyes, he was confused to find himself still inside the dungeon. He briefly wondered if his attackers had shown mercy by only knocking him out, but the reality was far more painful. His survival was due solely to the advanced healing crystal, which had automatically fully restored his health the moment he died. However, because it was a single-use item, it shattered immediately, meaning the $300,000 he hoped to earn had just vanished. Furious, he pounded the ground and screamed over the financial loss until he noticed the secret door remained open. He knew he couldn't clear the dungeon alone, but he refused to leave empty-handed after they had cost him his fortune. Driven by spite, he decided to follow them and sabotage their run, determined to become their worst nightmare. He charged through the entrance but failed to notice the stairs, tumbling down and losing 80 HP in the process. He had reached the Goblin Sanctuary, where a smug creature sat on a throne wearing an arrogant grin. Assuming that a goblin dungeon would be easy, he was confused by the eerie silence until he tripped over something on the floor. Looking down, he saw the dwarf lying in a pool of blood, still logged in, and desperately asking if the protagonist had a revival skill. It was clear the greedy player had lingered, hoping to snatch rewards upon respawning. Suddenly, a red system warning flashed, alerting the protagonist that the dungeon level was far beyond his capabilities and urging him to flee. His confusion turned to terror when he heard a familiar scream. Turning around, he saw a titan-like monstrosity snatching up the whip user, while Catherine Lee watched in horror. Catherine was trapped beneath the massive foot of Jagger, a terrifying level 80 beast. Given that the party members were only around level 30, the battle was hopeless from the start. The protagonist watched in horror as the creature used its spinning teeth to tear the whip-wielding man apart, a gruesome sight that emphasized the dark reality of Gate of the Heavens. Unlike standard games, this virtual world simulated full sensory input, including pain. While safety protocols usually dampened the sensation, facing a monster that was dozens of levels higher bypassed these safeguards, creating a risk of actual brain damage or permanent forced retirement from the game. When Catherine screamed for help, the protagonist coldly muttered that she was on her own, knowing there was nothing he could do against such an overwhelming force. He began to slip away, whispering that he wanted no part of this disaster and convincing himself that his only priority was survival. However, his escape was interrupted by a system notification stating that the Goblin Lord had sensed a deep affinity with his cowardice and weakness. Tears and snot streaming down his face, he yelled indignantly at the statue, arguing that he never chose to be powerless and would fight if he actually had the strength. As he shouted at the unmoving stone, the monster finished Catherine off, crushing her instantly. The protagonist reflected bitterly on his miserable existence. He had dreamed of being a hero, not a miner paying off debts left by relatives who had abandoned him. Having been humiliated in both the real world and the game, he felt enraged that a statue was now judging him too. He decided that if his life was already pathetic, he might as well embrace his low status. Suddenly, a prompt appeared declaring him an honorary goblin and announcing that he had unlocked a secret class, Goblin Summoner. He was confused and tried to reject the offer, disgusted by the idea of becoming the creature he hated most, but the system finalized the class change before he could object. With the level 80 beast now looming directly behind him and no path left to run, he realized he had no choice but to use the strange new power he had just been handed. He immediately activated the summoning skill, silently praying that the visual effects wouldn't be too flashy. To his relief, the creature that appeared was a small, ugly goblin with a massive nose and a tiny hammer, looking just as weak and pathetic as he had expected. Viewing the summon as nothing more than a disposable distraction, he ordered it to charge at the level 80 beast while he prepared to flee. However, he froze in his tracks when the little green monster struck the enemy and dealt over 900 million damage, instantly killing the giant beast. The protagonist stared in disbelief as experience points flooded the screen, causing his level to skyrocket in a matter of seconds. He even unlocked strange new abilities like Feed Goblin and Travel with Goblin. While the confused creature scratched its head, the protagonist realized that his summon had seemingly arrived with maxed out stats. Meanwhile, in the real world, the female mage woke up screaming in her room. Although an assistant rushed to remove her headset, the psychological shock of her in-game death was too severe, resulting in her permanent, forced retirement. Back inside the game, the goblin continued its rampage, obliterating everything in its path with single hits, while simultaneously mining every rock in sight. The protagonist, who had already reached level 31, tried to tell the creature, which bore the name Kim Chul-Su, to slow down so they wouldn't destroy all the valuable ores. Although the system marked the dungeon as cleared after the boss died, a glitch prevented him from leaving because his original party members were dead. Since the summon's status window was empty and it wasn't gaining experience, he concluded that its overwhelming power must be a bug. Deciding to exploit the error before the developers fixed it, he resolved to farm as many resources as possible, finally feeling like he was playing the true version of Gate of the Heavens. The setting shifts to a bank, where the teller called out ticket number 36 and informed the protagonist that his items amounted to $97,000. It was a testament to the game's massive scale that players could walk into a physical branch and sell virtual loot directly to the staff. He agreed to the transaction but asked to transfer the funds to a specific account, adding that he had a few more things to sell. When he casually presented a heart membrane from a level 80 Geiger, the teller looked at the item's data in sheer panic and immediately ran away, leaving him standing there confused and scratching his nose. Moments later, a man named Nar, who introduced himself as the branch manager, approached with a cup of tea. He apologized that the drink was cold because he had forgotten to boil the water, but the protagonist was more interested in why the manager had personally intervened. Nar explained that while the boy just wanted to exchange items for cash, leaving such a vast sum in a regular savings account would be a waste. The protagonist assumed his loot was worth perhaps $1 million at most, but the manager corrected him, revealing that the Geiger parts alone were currently valued at $220 million. The revelation caused the protagonist to hoist his goblin into the air and scream in disbelief, realizing that this massive fortune covered only 10% of his total debt. It was a staggering amount of money to owe, suggesting his financial situation was far beyond normal. Later, he found himself walking through the city with the strange creature, because, for some reason, he was unable to unsummon it. As the goblin licked railings and passers-by whispered about a monster being loose in town, the protagonist comforted himself with the thought that, at the very least, he was no longer the ugliest thing walking around. The goblin suddenly stopped screaming and froze as a red-haired man with a sword strapped to his back blocked their path. The stranger, who introduced himself as Patton the Annihilator, demanded to know why a beast was roaming the streets. Although the protagonist could tell the man was strong, he questioned the origin of such a dramatic title. When a bystander chimed in to say that Patton had given the nickname to himself, the protagonist immediately concluded that the swordsman was completely out of his mind. The protagonist attempted to explain that the green creature wasn't actually a monster, but Patton ignored him and charged in blindly. The attack backfired instantly. The swordsman took a massive hit of over 99,000 damage that launched him into a wall, knocking him unconscious. The crowd watched in shock as the Annihilator was effortlessly defeated, sending the protagonist into a panic. He realized that if the public discovered he was the one who summoned the goblin, the entire city would turn against him. Suddenly, a blue-haired man named Yumyuk arrived, mocking Patton for embarrassing himself again and claiming the goblin wasn't even worth fighting. Noticing a skilled female archer nearby, The protagonist realized the situation was spiraling out of control and that his summon was now public enemy number 1. He tried to de-escalate the tension by insisting he would handle the creature himself, asking why an entire squad needed to gang up on such a simple target. Yumiuk, however, demanded to know who he was and why he was interfering. The goblin, having lost patience, grabbed a rock and hurled it at one of Yumiuk's teammates, dealing lethal damage and killing him instantly. Realizing that having a max-level summon didn't guarantee a peaceful life, the boy and his creature sprinted away to escape. As they ran through the streets, an old man opened a door and ushered them inside, promising to explain everything later. The protagonist entered cautiously, wary because the stranger bore the title of the Trickster, which suggested he might be stabbed in the back. A system notification then appeared, stating that the Goblin Lord was impressed by his clever tactics of distracting the enemy to allow the goblin to strike, awarding him points. The protagonist felt bitter about the praise, remembering how the Lord had previously called him weak and vulgar, but was now labeling him a trickster. He questioned why his life was so miserable and why everyone, including the system, insulted him. Blaming his misfortune on the party that had betrayed him and left him to die, he made a decision. He told the goblin to listen up, declaring that he was finished with being humiliated and called weak. He vowed that together, they would destroy the guild responsible for his suffering, even self-deprecatingly noting that he was uglier than the monster. Meanwhile, on a nearby rooftop, a blonde woman asked Yumiuk if it was really necessary for them to hunt down a kid and a goblin. Yumiuk warned her to stay alert, pointing out that even if Patton was their weakest member, taking him out in one hit proved the goblin was dangerous. Their conversation was interrupted by a scream as the assassin who had tried to ambush the protagonist earlier dropped dead right beside them. Before Yumiuk could utter a word, the goblin had already closed the distance to his side. Although the guild member managed to react quickly enough to launch a counterattack, he was shocked to see that his strike inflicted absolutely 0 damage. Recalling that his ally had previously taken a massive hit of nearly 100,000 damage, Yumiuk realized with certainty that this creature's power was not a game glitch. Just as the goblin prepared to finish him off, Jian intervened with a precise arrow that parried the blow. She furiously scolded him, warning that getting himself killed by a mere goblin would be humiliating. Yumiuk silently agreed, confused as to how a monster known for being weak could deal millions in damage. Suspecting that the protagonist was using some sort of trick, he activated Extreme Wrath, a skill that significantly reduced his speed but guaranteed that every attack would be a critical hit. When Jian questioned the need for such excessive force against a simple mob, he assured her it was just a low-cost passive ability. He then switched to twin daggers to maximize his damage output and told her to prepare for a combo. She agreed, anxious to end the battle quickly before anyone witnessed them struggling against such a lowly foe. Ji-in unleashed a storm of arrows while Yumiuk charged in, fully buffed and declaring that the goblin was finished. However, his confident strike once again registered 0 damage. As he stood frozen in confusion, the goblin turned and slammed him into the wall with overwhelming force. The protagonist then emerged from the shadows, mocking their earlier assumption that the fight would be easy. The blonde archer, stunned, demanded to know how a simple summon could possess such terrifying power. Ignoring her confusion, the protagonist expressed his anger, but his choice of words was poor. He told her it was her fault for being irresistible. Misinterpreting this as a sexual advance, she recoiled, called him a creep, and began screaming for help. He frantically tried to explain that he only meant he was mad because they had attacked him first, but he quickly realized the misunderstanding was spiraling out of control. He instructed the goblin to quiet the shouting woman, but the creature's clumsy attempt, covering her mouth with its hand, looked incredibly suspicious. Nearby adventurers immediately noticed the commotion, recognizing him from earlier and assuming the worst, that he was using his monster to assault a defenseless girl after slaughtering her guildmates. As the crowd began to accuse him, the protagonist froze, realizing that the awkward scene was destroying his reputation on the server. Desperate to salvage the situation, he ordered the goblin to release her. To his surprise, the onlookers completely misinterpreted his actions. They didn't realize he was the summoner. Instead, they believed he was a brave hero stepping in to protect the woman from the beast that had just wiped out the Evelton Guild. Cheers erupted from the street below as people encouraged him to keep fighting. It finally dawned on him that his earlier vague comments about handling the creature had been taken as heroic vows to stop the monster, inadvertently crafting the perfect cover story. The only loose end was the blonde archer, the sole witness to the truth. Reasoning that she wouldn't want to meet the same gruesome end as her teammates, he silently pressured her to play along. She quickly nodded, promising to keep his secret. Seizing the moment, the protagonist loudly acted his part, condemning the invader for disturbing the town's peace and declaring that its reign of terror was over. He then activated a skill called Goblin Walk, causing a glowing chain to materialize and yank the creature to the floor. As he sprinted away, dragging the monster behind him, the spectators watched in awe, believing he had used a high-level binding spell to subdue the powerful enemy. In reality, the skill was nothing special. It simply allowed him to travel with his summon and, ironically, put the goblin in a slightly better mood. From above, the blonde archer watched the scene unfold, noting that the crowd believed he must be at least level 50 to control such a formidable beast. Since he couldn't actually kill the goblin to maintain his cover, the protagonist decided to switch tactics. He activated the Feed Goblin skill and hurled a sausage far into the distance, commanding the creature to fetch it. Once the monster ran off, he shouted for the townspeople to seal the gates. With the goblins successfully locked outside, the hesitant residents finally relaxed, believing the threat was over. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and confirmed with the crowd that the city was safe, solidifying his role as their protector. Shortly after, the blonde woman approached him. She explained that her guildmates had all been killed and had respawned back at the starting zone, making her the only person who knew the truth about his connection to the monster. Although she looked at him with sincere eyes and promised not to say a word, he wasn't willing to take any chances. He issued a cold warning. While the respawn zone offered infinite lives and protection, if she ever betrayed him, that would be the only place she could exist. He threatened to hunt her down and kill her anywhere else in the game. Terrified and in tears, she swore she would keep his secret. Back in the comfort of the room he had been gifted for his heroism, he felt a strange sense of pride while looking at a crude drawing of a goblin. He briefly lamented his inability to save the attractive girl from earlier, but soon shifted his focus to the goblin point he had earned. He decided to accept the name Skim, since the system used it, and nobody seemed to care about his real name anyway. Checking the skill shop, he found only one unlockable ability and purchased it immediately. To his surprise, using the skill didn't summon a new minion but rather recalled the existing one. The goblin materialized instantly, greeting him with a painful headbutt from its massive nose. This created a new problem. The creature was supposed to be exiled outside the walls, not sitting in his room. When concerned neighbors knocked to check on the noise, he quickly reassured them through the door that everything was fine, all while frantically ordering the goblin to put its weapon away and stay calm. Later that night, he reflected on how the goblin had been mistreated and attacked without cause, realizing that the two of them were actually quite similar. He muttered that this world was full of humans who were worse than monsters. Despite his philosophical realization, he found himself in a bizarre and cursed situation, sleeping curled up next to the goblin. The narrative then shifts to a local pub. As he entered, he was greeted warmly by the patrons, hailed as the hero who had saved the members of the Evelton Guild. Yumiuk expressed confusion over why Skim had chosen to help them, despite their hostile history, though he admitted he was grateful for the assistance. Nearby, a hooded figure tried to soothe the blonde woman, who was trembling in fear that the goblin might suddenly materialize. He assured her that the boy likely had no intention of fighting, but she remained terrified. Skim then revealed that his actions weren't entirely selfless. He had intervened because he needed a favor. The hooded man replied that since Skim had saved one of their own, they wouldn't turn him away, urging him to name his price. Skim explained his predicament. He had already passed level 30, meaning he could no longer gain experience in the beginner zone. He needed to advance to the next region, Florendal, but required help to get there. Yumiuk mentioned he knew the perfect contact for such a trip, but before he could finish, an elderly man at the next table interrupted, claiming to be the expert in question. Skim's expression immediately darkened as he recognized the man as the one who had previously betrayed him. Although the old man attempted to hide his name tag, Skim demanded to know what he was doing there. The deceiver quickly tried to de-escalate the situation, insisting that their past encounter was merely a misunderstanding. He added that after hearing Skim had defeated the goblin alone, he was certain the boy was much stronger than he appeared, perhaps even stronger than the others in the room. Skim scanned the pub, noting that while most adventurers were level 28, a solitary figure in the corner possessed a dangerous aura that Skim knew he couldn't survive against. Changing the subject to the task at hand, the old man explained the structure of the Lev region. While there were 5 standard dungeons, such as the slime-filled grasslands, mines, and forests, for grinding, leaving the area required clearing a special raid dungeon. Unlike the open hunting grounds, this final challenge had strict mechanics. It used timed gates that only opened during specific hours and enforced limits on the number of participants and attempts. Because it was the final barrier to the next world, most players preferred to max out their levels before entering. Yumiok stood up to clarify that this raid opened only once a month, which was the reason everyone had gathered at the pub that night. When Skim asked if this meant he was being invited to join, the group confirmed his suspicion. The group blamed Skim's goblin for ruining their plans, realizing they were now trapped in the Lev region for another month. The frustration was mutual. Even though Skim had earned over $200,000 from the level 80 monster and controlled one of the game's strongest summons, he was effectively stuck doing nothing. Desperate to leave, he grabbed Yumiuk and demanded a solution, insisting he couldn't afford to waste any more time. However, the guild member simply shrugged him off, stating that everyone was already annoyed by the delay and that his debt to Skim had been paid with the earlier advice. One by one, the adventurers walked away, leaving Skim behind. The blonde archer lingered for a moment to glance back at him before turning and swaying her hips as she followed the others. Left alone with his summon, Skim asked the creature what it was staring at. The goblin looked confused, seemingly sensing a disturbance from the forest, and suddenly, a raid boss portal materialized out of thin air. A system notification alerted the entire server, leaving both Skim and Yumiuk baffled by the impossible event. Patton, the red-haired warrior, was stunned that the raid had reappeared after only a day. As the group gathered at the entrance, the shady old man confirmed that the dungeon was currently empty, because all the eligible players had already entered the previous day. This meant they would be the only ones inside. Skim arrived moments later, furiously accusing them of lying to him. He was convinced they had told him to wait a month just to betray him and leave him behind, cursing himself for trusting people who were just as messed up as he was. The blonde woman frantically insisted that they hadn't lied and that this situation was a genuine anomaly. Although Skim looked ready to start a fight, Yumiuk simply acknowledged that things had changed and asked if he was coming or not. Skim replied that he certainly was, refusing to sit idly by while they took all the loot. Before they entered, Yumiuk explained that they would face a raid boss named Reverend immediately upon arrival. Despite the surprise, the party remained confident since the enemy was slightly below their level. Patton boasted that they could finish the fight in 10 seconds, even without their guild leader, and with that, Yumiuk led the charge as they jumped into the portal together. Before charging into the fray, Skim instructed the goblin to conceal itself behind a crate. He was determined to keep their partnership a secret to avoid being betrayed again, a lesson he had learned the hard way with the previous girl. Feeling secure with a newly purchased advanced healing crystal in his inventory, he sprinted through the portal. However, the scene inside was chaotic. Instead of the expected challenge, the group was running in terror from a massive level 40 steel boss. Realizing the situation had changed drastically, Uniac demanded an explanation from the old man, but the elder insisted he had no idea why the dungeon was different. Shigeon called out to the protagonist, revealing his real name, Kim Chulsu, and screamed for him to escape. Skim refused, looking at her as if she were crazy for wanting to abandon a secret dungeon. He argued that the rewards were worth the risk, and that a 10-level difference wasn't enough to cause forced retirement, likely resulting in nothing worse than some injuries and a few days of recovery. The rest of the party disagreed completely and continued their dash for the exit. Ignoring them, Skim attempted to use his rally skill to pull the goblin inside, but the ability failed inexplicably. As the boss charged straight at him, he shouted for his summon in a panic, only to be struck by a devastating blow that dealt 4,800 damage and knocked him to the ground. Patton watched in disbelief, wondering how such a fragile player had ever defeated a goblin, while Uniac noted with alarm that the exit portal had sealed shut, something that typically only happened in raids. The old man grimly realized that they had underestimated the location. It was a secret raid dungeon, a rare combination that trapped them inside with a boss far stronger than they anticipated. As Kim lay on the floor coughing up blood, overwhelmed by the brutal pain of the level gap, he bitterly regretted relying entirely on the goblin and forgetting to assign his own stat points. The protagonist was frustrated because the closed portal prevented him from summoning his goblin, meaning he might lose out on the incredible rewards hidden in the dungeon. In contrast, Yoniak was full of energy, rallying the team to begin the hunt while Kim watched silently from the sidelines. A player named GM cast a buff that increased the entire party's speed, giving them a significant advantage. Meanwhile, the old man stood back and shouted instructions, urging them to maintain their attack sequence and identify the enemy's weak points. Kim found this annoying, wondering why the man didn't just stop making speeches and join the fight. two Vanguard members launched an aerial attack toward the boss's head, followed immediately by Yoniak using Shadow Slash and Patton executing Chain Cut. Since Patton's skill hit 16 different points, they expected to find a weakness, but every strike dealt 0 damage. Before Yoniak could fully explain why their attacks were failing, the boss slammed him with a heavy blow, inflicting 1,800 damage. It turned out the monster, which had 28,000 HP, possessed a passive skill called Hatred of the Weak. This ability completely nullified any attack that dealt less than 5% of its total health. While Patton worried that only Yoniak was strong enough to break that threshold, the old man insisted they had another option. The female archer stepped forward to charge Deathbringer's arrow, a risky move that sacrificed her own health to increase damage output. To buy her time, Patton used a taunting battle cry to draw the raid boss's attention. Kim thought the warrior was crazy for trying to tank such a powerful monster instead of running, but Patton successfully withstood a direct hit that dealt 1,000 damage. He survived thanks to a damage-sharing link with the old man, who took a portion of the hit. Witnessing this coordination, Kim realized he had underestimated them. Despite being low-level players without secret classes, they were fighting like seasoned professionals. As Yoniak ordered the assassins to lower the boss's defense while the warriors kept it distracted, Kim marveled at how strong these average players actually were. The protagonist watched from the floor, realizing that the guild's coordinated power was impressive enough to actually defeat the boss. However, this was bad news for him. If they killed the monster while he was playing dead, he wouldn't receive any of the rewards. Fortunately, he still had the healing crystal in his hand. He used it and stood up just as the boss hesitated in front of Patton. Declaring that he was the highest level player present and couldn't stand watching them struggle anymore, Kin officially re-entered the fight. Unfortunately, his timing was catastrophic. The moment he drew the monster's attention, it unleashed a massive area of effect attack that instantly took out 4 party members. The survivors were furious, demanding to know why he had waited so long to wake up. When one of the blown-away assassins landed near Patton, the warrior lost his temper and screamed at Kin, blaming him for his teammates' injuries. The bald man urged Patton to stay calm and focus, but the warrior was too emotional. He recklessly charged in with his ultimate slash, only to be countered by a devastating strike from the boss. The blow dealt 3,800 damage to Patton, killing him instantly, and transferred a staggering 2,400 damage to the old man due to their link. As the old man shouted that the protagonist had ruined their entire plan, Kin yelled back that he hadn't done anything wrong. Uniac, however, explained the mechanics of the disaster. Patton's war cry had effectively focused the boss's aggression solely on the tank. When Kin stood up, it reset the monster's targeting, causing it to attack the support and assassin classes before they could react. Amidst the chaos, the female archer was still channeling her powerful skill, but the cost was high. Her health had already dropped to 46%. Uniac shouted for her to hold the charge no matter what, realizing they had only applied 3 of the necessary 5 marks on the boss's weak point. As Uniac rushed in to fix the situation, Kin stepped toward the archer, wanting to help his friend. However, she snapped at him before he could act, cruelly telling him that he was useless without his goblin and warning him not to make things worse. Kin stood there feeling crushed and resentful, thinking it was unfair to treat him like garbage for lacking a summon when they were the ones who had locked him in the dungeon without it. Gritting his teeth, he stared at the ground, furious that they were treating him like garbage, even though he was their only real chance at victory. He decided that if they wanted to act that way, he would let them all go down in flames without his help. Just as Uniac had predicted, the boss ignored the others and charged toward Ji-yun while she was still casting her ability. Anticipating this, Uniac intercepted the monster, using his twin blade skill to land 2 rapid strikes dealing over 1,900 damage each. His strategy was to inflict enough damage to draw the boss's full attention away from the archer, and it worked. With the monster now focused on him, Uniac attempted to activate Rapid Evasion to gain 3 seconds of physical immunity, hoping to buy time for Ji-yun. However, he made a fatal error. He had run out of mana, the skill failed, and he took a direct hit to the chest, dropping dead right in front of the protagonist. Kim was stunned, shouting that the genius, who supposedly had everything under control, had just died like a moron. Ji-yun, however, blamed Kim, claiming that his revival had thrown off their timing and that they could have won if he had stayed dead for just 10 more seconds. Offended, Kim decided he was done trying to be a team player and hoped they would lose all their rewards. As the boss charged at Ji-yun, she prepared to fire her unfinished shot, but Kim suddenly started chuckling. He asked if she was immobilized while casting, and before she could protest, he threw her over his shoulder and sprinted away. They dodged the boss's slam just in time, leaving Ji-yun shocked that he was nearly as fast as Uniac. The reason for his speed was absurd. He had dumped all 26 of his stat points into agility, a move so reckless not even a foolish assassin would try it. It seemed that acting like a jerk and letting the strategy collapse was all part of his plan. It turned out that his unique talent worked by awarding him a Goblin point whenever he behaved like a complete menace. Having earned one, he hoisted the archer onto his shoulder as if she were featherlight and continued running. When he demanded she release her arrow, she complained that aiming was nearly impossible while moving at such high speeds. He dismissed her concerns, insisting that she absolutely could not miss because he wanted revenge for the pain he had suffered and the expensive healing crystal he had been forced to use. Kim moved with incredible agility, spinning around the boss like a top, while the monster swung wildly in every direction. Although the archer's skill was finally fully charged, her health had dropped to a critical 1%. Just as he shouted for her to end the fight, the giant unleashed a devastating area of effect ability called World Shatter, filling the air with lethal debris. The situation seemed hopeless. With her health so low, even a small pebble would be fatal. She panicked, stating that the flying rocks blocked her line of sight, but Kim told her not to worry because he was seeing visions. When she asked if this was part of a plan, he bleakly admitted it was just his life flashing before his eyes, signaling their imminent death. Suddenly, a rift tore open, and his goblin summon burst through, dealing massive damage upon impact. Kim's initial impulse was to punch the creature for arriving so late, but he paused when he realized that Ji-yun couldn't see it. Seizing the opportunity, he activated Goblin Shield and hurled the green monster into the chaos to absorb the incoming attack. As the goblin mocked the dying boss, the archer's arrow found its mark, piercing the giant's chest and dealing over 22,000 damage. The monster fell, and the system announced that the secret dungeon had been cleared. The victory brought massive rewards. Ji-yun jumped from level 27 to 31, while Kim advanced from 31 to 34. True to his greedy nature, the protagonist wasted no time celebrating and immediately sprinted toward the loot to see what he had won. Moments later, a system message confirmed that all fallen allies had been revived. Yoon Hyuk reappeared, wiping blood from his mouth, and noting that if the boss had been any stronger, the outcome would have been disastrous. However, the mood remained tense as the old man stood completely frozen, appearing not to breathe. Dismissing the elder's condition for the moment, Yoon Hyuk turned to Kim and immediately demanded an explanation. The goblin stood guard over the gear, shouting for everyone to stay back and claiming all the loot for himself. When a party member questioned this behavior, Ji-yeon explained that the creature had always been strange, noting how it had bolted toward the treasure the moment the boss was defeated. However, the victory brought confusion rather than rewards. Both she and Kim received a notification stating they had failed to meet the conditions for the secret class. While Ji-yeon struggled to understand how they could fail after killing every enemy, Kim suspected the requirements might be unconventional, similar to how he had originally earned the Goblin Lord's favor. Deciding to focus on the immediate rewards, Kim turned his attention to the item drops. When Ji-yeon suggested they split the loot evenly since everyone had contributed, he aggressively refused, treating the pile as his personal treasure. His possessive behavior made her wonder if he was turning into a golem-like figure, but Yoon Hyuk intervened to settle the dispute. He argued that since the boy had saved them twice, and their only priority had been escaping the dungeon, they should let him keep the spoils. However, the tension persisted as the shady old man tried to sneak up on Kim. Anticipating a betrayal, Skim warned him to back off, though Yoon Hyuk insisted that if they wanted to hurt him, they would have done it already. The group explained that their only interest was the bow, a unique item that Skim couldn't use because he wasn't an archer. Since unique items couldn't be sold on the market, they urged him to hand it over to Ji-yeon. Skim, echoing his goblin's fascination with the rare weapon, refused to give it up for free. He pointed out that if he bound the item to himself, its value would be lost to them forever, so he demanded they buy it from him instead. Realizing Skim had planned this extortion from the start, the old man glared at him while Yoon Hyuk noted how much the boy resembled his greedy goblin. After the trade was made for the massive giant's bow, Yoon Hyuk muttered that Skim had a gift for being hated and asked where he was going next. Skim replied bluntly that he was going anywhere that was far away from them. Yanyuk grudgingly admitted that Skim's plan was solid, even while calling him a bastard. As the group departed, the beautiful blonde archer offered a friendly wave goodbye, leaving Skim to focus on his next move. He immediately resummoned his goblin, who hopped around excitedly in the cleared dungeon. Although Skim couldn't use the massive bow he had acquired, he was pleased with his other loot, a stash of ultra-pure iron, rare materials, and a thief's glove. This unique item allowed the user to steal anything once, though it came with restrictions against targeting other users or higher-level entities. The scene then shifted to Florendal, a city bustling with high-level players where Skim felt he could practically smell the potential for profit. However, before embarking on any grand adventures, he knew he needed to address his equipment. Being one-shot earlier had been a harsh wake-up call, and he was still wearing smelly level 3 gear that was likely hurting his defense rather than helping it. His thoughts were interrupted when the goblin tugged at his pants. Just as Skim turned to scold the creature for causing trouble, he froze. A massive tiger was standing right behind them. Panic set in as he wondered why a raid boss was roaming the middle of the city. His fear was cut short by the arrival of Irene, a Luhire's summoner, who casually asked if the goblin belonged to him. Skim realized she was the owner of the giant beast, which she introduced as Michelle, assuring him that the tiger was super chill. Despite her assurances, Skim felt the predator was eyeing him like a snack, and sensed that this woman was dangerously powerful, strong enough to vaporize the entire Evelton guild if she wanted to. Irene smiled and called him cute, asking for his name. When he replied, Skim Cholsu, she clarified that she wasn't actually interested in him, but rather the little creature beside him. She was surprised to learn the goblin didn't have a name. Skim dismissed the idea, arguing that it was just an ugly summoned monster, but Irene warned him that his negligence was dangerous. She explained that the creature's aggression toward its master stemmed from that lack of connection, and that one-sided relationships were unstable. Hoping he wouldn't be so stubborn next time, she called Michelle and walked away. Although Skim wanted to fight her, he knew he was outmatched, so he simply thanked her for the advice. Moments later, a stranger called out to him, bluntly pointing out that his gear was absolute garbage. The shopkeeper insulted Kim's equipment, remarking that wearing a trash can would offer better protection. Kim snapped back, demanding the man stop roasting him since the whole point of his visit was to buy decent gear. The merchant, a man aptly named Humphrey the Dirty Mouth, offered him a chest plate for 350 coins. Since that amount converted to only about $40, a negligible sum compared to his 20 million debt, Kim decided to make the purchase. He reasoned that as a summoner, his priority was staying alive long enough to use his skills, making high defense essential. Humphrey praised the item, boasting that he had crafted it from premium materials and advising Kim to make good use of it. However, the moment Kim equipped the armor, he found himself unable to move and complained that it was the worst piece of junk he had ever worn. The blacksmith retorted that trash like him deserved to stay stiff and die early, but the technical reason for the paralysis was a stat requirement. The armor demanded 24 strength, but because Kim had dumped all his points into agility during the steel giant fight, he only had 4. When he tried to sell the item back immediately, Humphrey scoffed and offered him a mere 30 coins, suddenly dismissing his own creation as shoddy work. Mid-argument, Kim noticed a quest marker floating above the blacksmith's head. Humphrey explained that he had lost his hammer in a nearby water dungeon and couldn't forge anything without it. Although Kim pointed out that there were several hammers sitting right on the counter, the man insisted he needed that specific tool. Upon learning that the reward included the ability to process materials and craft armor, Kim realized he could turn the rare resources from the secret dungeon into profitable gear and eagerly accepted the quest. Kim felt confident he could clear the dungeon in 30 minutes with just his goblin, but Humphrey shouted that he had to come along. Realizing he had to protect the level 13 blacksmith, Kim devised a plan to use his high speed to rush ahead and clear the dangers before the old man arrived. This strategy backfired almost instantly. A system alert warned him that the NPC was under attack. Spinning around, Kim saw that a swarm of rats and slimes had already cornered the screaming blacksmith. The protagonist summoned his green companion, who immediately obliterated the surrounding enemies, dealing massive damage with every hit. Humphrey initially puffed out his chest and declared himself invincible, but his mood shifted abruptly when he claimed to sense something strange. Insisting that his hammer was located in a different direction, the blacksmith suddenly bolted away. Kim briefly considered killing or restraining the erratic old man, but he knew that would result in a failed quest, so he ordered the goblin to stick to the NPC like glue and destroy anything that approached him. Predictably, it took only 10 seconds for a swarm of rats to surround the blacksmith. The goblin charged in and cleared the vermin instantly with powerful strikes, yet Humphrey took the credit, boasting about a secret technique and how dangerous he was when he went all out. Kim decided the man was simply eccentric, but was relieved he remained safe, until Humphrey yelled for them to stop underestimating him. He activated a battle cry skill to prove his worth, which disastrously drew the attention of every nearby enemy and woke a crowned skeleton and its army from their eternal slumber. When the undead leader demanded to know who had disturbed its rest, Humphrey merely remarked that the dungeon was finally becoming interesting, leaving Kim to wonder why the blacksmith seemed determined to make the mission harder. Once again, the goblin saved the day by catching a rock and hurling it at the skeletons. The projectile ricocheted off the walls, dealing devastating damage and clearing the entire path. 3 hours later, Kim was exhausted by the blacksmith's relentless trolling, though the sheer number of kills had allowed him to level up 3 times. As Kim leaned against a wall to rest, he heard a click, followed by Humphrey's warning that it was a trap. 3 golden arrows flew toward them, and Kim quickly commanded the goblin to tank the damage. He was confused about what had triggered the mechanism until he realized Humphrey had stepped directly on a skull switch. The arrow struck the blacksmith in the gut, halving his health, yet he still had the audacity to call Kim a coward for using his ally as a shield. Kim fought the urge to kill the man on the spot, a feeling that only intensified when he realized Humphrey was now poisoned. Humphrey's health continued to drain until the poison finally claimed him. Furious at the outcome, Kim sprinted back through the city streets, vowing to kill the blacksmith the next time they crossed paths. As he blazed through the town, a man in a suit tried to flag him down, shouting that he had finally located Mr. Kim, but the protagonist ignored him. Upon bursting into the shop, he was shocked to find Humphrey standing there alive, casually asking what kind of gear he needed. Still seething, Kim pointed at his goblin and menacingly asked if the smith had any last words. Ignoring the threat, Humphrey simply thanked him for retrieving the hammer. Kim was bewildered, as he hadn't realized the mission was finished, but the system confirmed the quest was complete. When he demanded an explanation, the blacksmith revealed that the hammer had dropped from the very first slime they killed. He hadn't mentioned it earlier simply because he considered Kim to be trash. Moving on to business, Humphrey began working with the high-tier metal Kim had provided. He told the boy to brace himself for a miracle, claiming he was about to sweat over the forge to create something legendary. However, despite the dramatic speech, he announced the work was done just 10 seconds later, leaving Kim to point out that the man hadn't even broken a sweat. The resulting item, crafted from rare boss drops, was a set of level 36 light armor. Although it made him look thinner, it was powerful, requiring 34 agility to equip and possessing a 1% chance to trigger a skill called Heaven and Earth Destruction. Humphrey refused payment, insisting that receiving gratitude would be disgusting. Kim shrugged and retorted that it was perfect, as he had no intention of thanking a bastard anyway. Their exchange was cut short when a stranger activated player killer mode and thrust a sword at Kim, missing by inches. Kim jumped back, demanding to know the reason for the sudden assault. The attacker, a man in glasses, noted that dodging the strike was impressive and proved Kim was the one who had abandoned his lady near death. Kim briefly mentioned that his high agility saved him, but quickly pivoted to ask who this lady was. The butler interrupted, accusing him of feigning ignorance. He stated that records showed a Kim Chul-soo was the last person in a party with her. As the man charged again, mentioning the name Catherine, the protagonist finally realized who he was talking about. Kim finally pieced it together, realizing that Catherine was the chubby girl who had accompanied the dwarf in his very first party. He frantically told the man to wait, insisting that he was the true victim who had been dragged into that mess against his will. The butler scoffed at this claim, noting the irony that Kim was walking around fine while his mistress had been lying in a vegetative coma ever since the incident. This news genuinely stunned Kim. He knew the level 80 Geiger dealt massive damage, but he hadn't expected it to be life-threatening in the real world. He shouted that the monster was to blame, not him, but the butler retorted that Kim's innocence was irrelevant. The real problem was that the tragedy had thrown the succession of the Semyon group into chaos. Strangely, despite the butler's aggression, his latest strike landed with 0 damage. Confused, Kim suggested they talk it out, realizing that Catherine must be the daughter of a CEO from a conglomerate comparable to Samsung, a massive empire controlling everything from electronics to airplanes. The butler demanded to know if a level 80 creature was truly responsible. When Kim confirmed it, the man questioned how a level 3 novice could survive unharmed while a level 40 player was left in a critical state. Kim admitted that he had unlocked a secret class by pure luck, which allowed him to escape. However, he privately acknowledged that no doctor could fix the type of damage she had suffered and that he would have died instantly if he had taken that hit. The butler remained skeptical, finding it unbelievable that a mere class change could offer enough protection to save a low-level player from such a fate. Kim lacked a medical explanation, aware that her chances of recovery were practically non-existent. The butler grimly advised him to accept the situation, revealing that top specialists had already declared her case hopeless. Surprised by this resignation, Kim countered with a new theory. Since the trauma occurred within the game, perhaps the cure existed there as well. To sell the idea, he fabricated a story about a patient in the US who miraculously woke up against 1 in 10 million odds. Driven by greed and a desire for payback against the girl who had previously deceived him, he insisted that trying something was better than waiting for the inevitable. To his astonishment, the desperate family actually agreed to his proposal and logged the unconscious girl into the virtual world. Kim suddenly realized the danger he was in. If they discovered he had invented the entire story, they would likely kill him. Since he had no actual way to wake her, he decided to put on a convincing performance, planning to waste time and eventually deliver the sad news that he had tried his best, hoping to secure a financial reward from the corporation regardless of the outcome. However, moving her limp avatar proved difficult. Remembering that characters fall forward when pulled, he improvised a solution by tying a leash around her neck. He began dragging her through the game like a piece of luggage, a bizarre spectacle that immediately drew unwanted whispers and attention from other players. Passers-by were horrified to see him using a goblin to haul the girl around like cargo, labeling him the worst player in the game and shouting that he deserved to die for such behavior. Although he tried to diffuse the hostility by claiming he and the girl were close, a man with a mustache retorted that he felt close enough to the protagonist to beat the living daylights out of him. Kim immediately realized that once again, his reputation in the city had been completely destroyed. Just then, a familiar voice called out, signaling the arrival of the old con artist he knew all too well. When they met in an alley, the boy muttered that he never expected to run into Sungrill the Persuasive again, but the old man snapped back, angrily correcting him that his title was The Cunning. He revealed that he had already deduced Kim was the one who summoned the goblin. Kim simply shrugged off the accusation, explaining that he had done what was necessary to survive a tight spot. Shifting the focus to business, Kim asked why the Evelton Guild was in the area and what they were planning. Sun Grill told him to relax, explaining that the guild members were usually scattered and had only gathered previously to complete a specific raid. Remembering that the old man was a source of valuable intel, Kim demanded details about the guild, but Sun Grill hushed him. He pointed toward a specific path, claiming it was a better place to find information about Florindal. It was an obvious trap. Kim could clearly see 2 C4 charges and a laser setup waiting on the road, likely the same spot where another player had recently been beaten up without learning anything useful about the raid conditions. The old man was puzzled by the boy's obsession with the raid, noting that Kim had just arrived in the city, yet was always rushing around frantically. Kim bluntly admitted that he was after money, which meant hunting stronger monsters in dangerous areas, privately reasoning that he had to exploit his glitched goblin before the developers fixed it. Sun Grill explained that even if he wanted to rush, there was a proper progression to follow. He revealed that the next step was to travel to the city of Phoenix to pick up the main quest, a location teeming with high-level players. To the old man's surprise, Kim instantly lit up with excitement. Thrilled by the prospect of high-level content and the main quest, he loudly demanded to know exactly where this city was located. After forcing the location out of the informant and slamming him to the ground, Kim ordered the goblin to move out. However, panic instantly set in when he realized the creature was no longer carrying the unconscious girl she was supposed to be transporting. Meanwhile, in a secluded alley, 2 predatory men were looming over her, making gross comments about her high-quality gear and what lay beneath it. Mistakenly believing she had simply stepped away or was resting, they convinced themselves she wouldn't be able to resist their advances. As they crept closer, practically drooling, Kim sprinted toward the scene, screaming that she was in a coma and that even the slightest impact could be fatal. As he ran, he recalled a tense call with the butler in glasses, who had demanded to see the girl to confirm her safety. Kim had lied, claiming she was fine but refusing to show her because he was allegedly in the middle of a critical mission, before rudely hanging up. In the real world, the butler apologized to the man standing beside him, President Kamun, the head of the massive conglomerate that controlled everything from electronics to heavy industry. The president dismissed the boy's rudeness, suggesting that Kim was likely just terrified of putting his daughter in danger. However, the butler questioned why they were allowing a stranger to control her avatar, especially since the theory about healing her inside the game was likely nonsense. Kamun agreed that the boy had probably invented the idea, but he explained that Catherine's fate as an heiress had been sealed since childhood. The game was the only aspect of her life she had chosen for herself. He felt it was better for her to rest in that virtual paradise, where she had felt free, rather than rotting away in a hospital bed. Back in the game, Kim was exhausted, cursing the developers for implementing a realistic stamina system that made his lungs burn. Realizing that searching the entire city on foot would be a nightmare, he remembered the Goblin point he had earned earlier and checked his skill tree. He ignored life sharing, which transferred his health to the summon, and focused on a skill called Goblin Throw. Taking the name literally, he summoned the creature, grabbed it, and hurled it high into the air. As the little green monster soared over the rooftops, it spotted the girl and pointed a finger toward her location, giving Kim exactly what he needed. Guided by the goblin's signal, Kim sprinted toward the alley, screaming that he had arrived to save the day. However, his rescue mission hit a snag when he collided with the two creeps looming over the unconscious girl. One of the men immediately insulted Kim's appearance, remarking that he looked even worse up close, and claimed that they were about to take care of the woman themselves. Kim furiously told them to get lost, rejecting their creepy insinuations. When the man with the mustache smirked and argued that they were just handsome heroes saving a damsel in distress, Kim pointed out the irony of them putting her in danger. Before he could finish his sentence, the men lunged at him. The conflict ended as quickly as it began. Kim snapped, and his goblin sprang into action, instantly killing both attackers. Standing over their bodies, Kim laughed maniacally, mocking the handsome men for getting destroyed by someone they considered ugly. His victory celebration, complete with him sticking his tongue out while dragging Catherine's body, was cut short when a city guard discovered the chaotic scene. The soldier immediately demanded an explanation for the double homicide and the apparent kidnapping, warning that such crimes in the city carried heavy consequences. Although Kim argued that he had acted in self-defense, he knew the guard wouldn't believe him. Fearing that an arrest would waste precious time, he began to calculate if he could kill the lone officer and run. Just as he prepared to attack, Sanrio grabbed his shoulder, revealing that he had been looking for him. Kim angrily told the lying old man to go away, but Sanrio issued a grave warning. Killing a guard would mark him as a target for every NPC in the game forever. Advising him to think carefully, Sanrio stepped forward to handle the situation. He approached the officer with smooth words, thanking him for his hard work in protecting the citizens. Although the guard remained suspicious and ordered him to keep his hands visible, the old con man activated a charm ability. By slipping the soldier a few coins as a bribe, he instantly boosted their relationship meter, effectively diffusing the tension. The guard hesitated, questioning if the large sum of money was a serious offer. When the old man confirmed it was, the soldier immediately grabbed him, furious that someone would attempt to bribe an honest officer. Since bribery was a crime, the old man's relationship standing with the guard plummeted instantly. Kim watched the scene unfold and realized that the lying con artist had effectively gotten himself arrested to clear the path. For the first time, the old trickster had actually done something decent. Later, standing before a massive structure, Kim was frustrated to find the entrance barred, especially since rumors claimed the main quest was inside. A blonde man standing nearby interrupted his complaints, advising him not to bother because the door hadn't opened in a long time. Introducing himself as Shin, the stranger remarked that Kim's intense gaze marked him as a newcomer with a true adventurer's spirit. He suggested that Kim prove himself by assisting with a task in some lost ruins. As Kim impatiently mentally mashed the skip button to bypass the dialogue, the main quest Show Me Your Skills appeared, requiring him to retrieve a golem's core. Kim grumbled that the NPC was ridiculous for not explaining the dungeon's mechanics sooner. It turned out to be an obstacle course focused on dodging rather than combat. While his maxed-out agility made the run easy for him, the unconscious girl he was dragging posed a serious problem. She couldn't take even a scratch of damage. He ordered the goblin to stay behind with her, while he dashed to the safe zone, planning to use his rally skill to pull them across instantly. He reached the other side in seconds, and activated the recall ability. The goblin flew toward him, grinning with its tongue hanging out. But Kim had forgotten a crucial detail. The rope was still tied to Catherine. The line went taut, violently yanking her into the air. Panic ensued as she swung dangerously close to ceiling blades and open lava pits. Kim screamed for the goblin to act, and eventually, she slammed onto the ground, looking completely wrecked. Terrified that her death would ruin his plans, Kim rushed to her side and frantically called her name. As he checked on her condition, the story began to shift into a deep dive of her memories. Inside her memory, Catherine faced a brutal confrontation with her father, Kamoon. He angrily demanded to know if her tardiness was due to spending time with her friends, dismissing them as worthless people she would eventually forget, since friendship meant nothing at her age. His verbal abuse escalated as he criticized her makeup and short skirt, telling her she looked like a night worker, and accusing her of choosing to live like human trash. While she cried and apologized, she looked to her mother for support, but received only a cold, silent stare. The situation reached its breaking point when her father declared her the only failure in his entire life, leaving her frozen in shock. Back in the game, Kim asked the goblin what they should do next. The creature offered a crude suggestion, noting that Kim would likely never meet another girl this attractive, so he should try waking her up with mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Kim knew that game physics didn't allow for actual air transfer, making the idea medically useless. However, since she was practically dead anyway, he reasoned that the mental shock of the act might jolt her back to consciousness. Just as he leaned in with a ridiculous expression on his face, the butler interrupted the connection, accusing Kim of being a predatory creep and threatening to kill him. Kim panicked and tried to assure the man that she was safe, but the butler scoffed at his excuses. He explained that he monitored her avatar constantly, while a team of doctors watched over her real body. Furthermore, he revealed that her white spider magic dress provided defense comparable to steel, despite its soft look, and he had only logged in to ensure a disgusting goblin kid didn't touch her. Uninterested in listening to the lecture, Kim told him to get lost and abruptly ended the call. Realizing that her armor negated 90% of all damage, Kim and the goblin immediately began using her unconscious body as a tool. They rode her like a skateboard to outrun a giant boulder, used her as a counterweight to swing across gaps, and even threw her at golems to tank hits. Kim briefly worried he had gone too far when he used her as a projectile, but treating her like garbage earned him a goblin point, which he appreciated. As he marveled at her utility, he missed a small detail. Her finger twitched slightly. Suddenly, the goblin launched an explosive attack, flying through the smoke to hit a golem for 999 damage, a feat that no longer even surprised Kim. Kim muttered that he simply needed to seize the core to end the battle, but the golem defied his expectations by rebuilding itself and entering Phase 2. Dismissing the threat with a shrug, he ordered the goblin to strike again. Despite the creature dealing another massive 999 damage, the monster reassembled for Phase 3, causing a frustrated Kim to silently beg the game to stop cheating. He used the rally skill to recall his summon, but this time the goblin absorbed a hit before launching its own attack. Explosions erupted behind Kim as he sprinted away from the golem, which was now slamming the ground and setting the area on fire. He realized the creature would keep shifting phases unless he destroyed its core. Although he recalled Sunreal's advice about targeting weak points, he lacked the necessary skills to do so, leaving him with no choice but to relentlessly attack until the monster finally died. As he zigzagged through the dungeon dodging attacks, he ran past Catherine, who remained unresponsive. While Kim managed to avoid the golem's strike, the punch continued toward her face. The impact recreated the sensation of being crushed by the previous boss, causing her to wake up screaming. As the room shook with explosions, Kim bit his nails in panic, reassuring himself that the hit shouldn't have been fatal. Meanwhile, the confused boss began devouring its own arm. Suddenly, Catherine stood up, radiating an overwhelming presence. Having triggered her escape skill, she aggressively demanded to know where she was, who he was, and why she was there. Kim stood frozen, stunned that she was awake, and briefly worried she might remember him using her as a skateboard. However, the thought of receiving a massive reward for saving the heir to the Samsung Group took priority. He approached her to explain that she had fallen unconscious in a hidden dungeon, and that he had secured her father's permission to save her. Before he could finish describing his hard work, she punched him mid-sentence, sending him crashing through a wall. Groaning on the ground, he complained about the lack of warning, only to look up and see her sprinting away, leaving him behind. Consumed by terror, Catherine sobbed and screamed, terrified that her father would kill her if he discovered she had returned to Heaven's Gate. In the midst of this hysteria, she suddenly regained consciousness in her hospital bed. The butler burst into the room to find the medical team struggling to manage her extreme agitation, leading him to immediately suspect that the boy had done something terrible. While one doctor suggested cutting power to the pod to snap her out of it, another warned that this could cause her to black out again. The butler firmly rejected the idea, noting that since in-game sensations were linked to reality, disconnecting her while she was in a dungeon was too dangerous. Instead, he decided to log in and track down Kim himself. Back in the ruins, the golem launched stone missiles directly at Catherine. Just as she resigned herself to death, the goblin intercepted the attack, shielding her from the impact. Kim shouted that she couldn't outrun the monster, but she had already collapsed on the ground, shaking and repeating how scared she was. Confused by her behavior and needing to control the situation, Kim initially ordered his goblin to knock her unconscious. However, he hesitated when she looked up and begged for help. She promised to pay him far more than whatever her father had offered, regardless of his connection to the company, provided he helped her escape the toxic environment of the group and its employees. Kim agreed instantly, assuring her they would get out safely, though he was visibly shaken by her admission that she was tired of being hit. Just as the goblin prepared to deliver a knockout blow to her neck, the butler's voice exploded over the comms, demanding to see the girl immediately. Kim quickly canceled the order, instructing the goblin to hold off the golem instead. Turning his attention to the furious butler, Kim asked why the man still doubted him when he had been hired fairly. Adopting a cocky tone, he lied that Catherine seemed to be enjoying the process and insisted that he wasn't kidnapping her, but simply helping her recover. The butler remained confused, convinced that the girl's earlier reaction was merely a seizure since she didn't appear to be truly conscious. He argued that she looked unstable and demanded that Kim leave the dungeon immediately, declaring their agreement null and void because they wanted her back. Kim instantly rejected the demand, insisting he was in a critical situation, but the call cut off before he could say more. Muttering to himself, he warned Catherine that she had better be honest about the money she promised. When she admitted she had lied and didn't have the cash, he threatened to sell her back to her group to collect the bounty unless she handed over every coin she possessed. Desperate and in tears, she begged him to keep her secret, offering to sell her gear, which, contrary to his low estimate, was actually worth 100 million. Just as they prepared to have the goblin attack, they noticed a terrifying change. The monster had evolved into a four-armed beast at stage 5, level 170. Kim panicked, realizing the creature was leveling up instead of dying, and that a single hit would kill them all, so he turned and ran for his life. Suddenly, a frost spell locked his body in place, leaving him confused until Catherine explained she had cast it to buy them a brief window to escape. She released him, and they both bolted toward the exit, but the rope trailing behind her snagged, yanking her to the ground by her neck. As the massive enemy closed in, Catherine screamed for help, knowing she couldn't survive an attack from a level 170 monster. Kim hesitated, torn by the situation. Unlike in the past, when he was too weak to act, he now had a choice, yet he knew he wasn't a hero. Reasoning that he had no doctors or fortune to save him if he got hurt, and that he would simply die alone in a hospital, he apologized and turned his back on her. Watching him leave, Catherine felt a familiar sting of abandonment, realizing he was just like her mother and that no one truly cared about her. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the area, injuring her arms. However, it wasn't Kim who had intervened, but the NPC named Shin, who held the title of God. Shin congratulated Kim for holding out as long as he did. At that moment, Kim finally understood the dungeon's true mechanic. The mission was impossible from the start. He realized the golem core likely didn't exist, and the boss was programmed to evolve endlessly, with the system designed for the NPC to step in and save the player right before defeat. Reflecting on the massive punch that had sent him flying earlier, Kim realized he hadn't felt any actual pain, because the entire sequence was a scripted event. Shin, the newly arrived NPC, immediately scolded the golem for harming his subordinate. Relieved to finally have backup, Kim rushed forward for the next round, warning Shin to brace himself. However, an explosion suddenly rocked the area next to him. To Kim's shock, Shin simply dusted himself off, acting as if nothing had happened, and claiming the attack wasn't even a warm-up. Kim watched in confusion as the NPC lunged again, only to get swatted down. That was when he noticed a critical detail. This self-proclaimed god was only level 70. The dungeon was designed for players between level 30 and 40, so a level 70 ally was supposed to be overpowered. However, because Kim had used his goblin, the boss had evolved into an unstoppable monster far beyond its intended level 45 limit. Shin stood up and repeated his line about the fight being too easy, revealing that he was stuck in a dialogue loop. As an immortal NPC, he couldn't die, but he was also too weak to defeat the glitched enemy, trapping them in a stalemate. Kim theorized that Shin's arrival might have finally exposed the golem's core, making it vulnerable. He watched closely as the NPC lunged at the monster's weak point and tried to join the attack, taking another hit in the process. Ultimately, it wasn't Kim or Shin who ended the fight. The goblin hurled a boulder from across the room, landing the finishing blow. True to his script, Shin declared that he had saved everyone and that the monster was hardly a challenge. Kim was too anxious to celebrate, his thoughts consumed by Catherine's fate, until he saw her standing quietly nearby, alive. Once they were safely outside, the NPC praised Kim, noting that despite needing rescue, the boy showed great potential. Kim felt humiliated and guilty, wishing he could disappear. Leaving her behind felt far worse than her initial attempt to trick him. He was grateful that Shin kept talking to fill the uncomfortable silence. Finally, the NPC bid them farewell, stating he existed on a higher plane before walking to a specific spot to await his next quest trigger. With the NPC gone, a heavy silence fell over the pair as Kim stood there, awkwardly glancing at Catherine. Kim finally gathered enough courage to admit that the previous incident was his fault, but before he could finish, Catherine's father interrupted them. Although Kim didn't recognize the newcomer immediately, the man radiated an intense aura that suggested he was either incredibly wealthy or dangerously powerful. Noting that his daughter was finally awake, when Catherine asked why he was there, Kim replied that he knew she had regained consciousness the moment she convulsed. He scolded her for worrying him sick while pretending to be an adult, criticizing her for wasting time in a stupid game and becoming a burden to others. Turning his attention to the protagonist, Kim thanked him for taking care of her, acknowledging that Kim had kept his promise to wake her up. He assured the boy that a generous reward would follow and that they would be in contact soon. As Kim extended his hand and ordered Catherine to leave with him, the atmosphere became suffocating. Kim felt a surge of anger toward her for being such a mess, yet she showed no resentment toward him for his earlier betrayal. Instead of screaming or blaming him for abandoning her, she simply walked away with a look of absolute despair, as if marching toward hell. Kim wondered why she didn't beg for help this time, but he already knew the answer. He had proven that he wasn't someone she could trust or rely on. For a fleeting moment, he imagined a scenario where he could save her. In this fantasy, he shouted for them to stop, recognizing the man as President Han Kim of the Samsung Group, a figure publicly known for kindness and compassion. He imagined questioning why, if her father was such a role model, Catherine looked so broken and near death while leaving with him. In his mind, he grabbed her arm, declared she was coming with him, and challenged the powerful CEO. However, none of this actually happened. It was nothing more than a desperate daydream. In reality, he stood frozen, watching her walk away. Deep down, he accepted that a coward who constantly broke promises had no business trying to save anyone. He couldn't even save himself, so dreaming of being a hero was ridiculous. Kim Chol-soo resigned himself to the fact that he would simply remain a goblin for the rest of his life. Nearby, knights began whispering, recognizing Ki-moon as the legendary Night King who had helped defeat the Duke. As the whispers turned into loud cheers for the famous player, someone in the crowd loudly asked who the attractive woman beside him was. Ki-moon dismissed his daughter coldly, stating that she was just someone he was currently grouped with. Ki-moon turned to Catherine, coldly instructing her to consider how the public perceived him versus how they saw her. He emphasized that if anyone discovered she was his daughter, the resulting shame would be unbearable. As the crowd cheered his name like he was royalty, Kim stood frozen in the street, only snapping out of it when a stranger shoved him aside for blocking the path. Kim realized that the rumors were true. She really was the president's daughter. However, he tried to suppress his rising guilt by telling himself that his own life, plagued by poverty and unpaid rent, was still harder than whatever she was going through. He decided it would be best to simply forget everything he had seen. His thoughts were interrupted by a voice echoing from a nearby sewer grate. It was Sungreal, the old con artist, shouting that something big was happening. Kim was startled and wondered why the scumbag was hiding down there. The old man explained that after escaping from the guards, he had become a hunted fugitive forced to live underground. He then made a disturbing comment about the unique view he had of women walking above, confirming to Kim that the man was not just a criminal, but a total creep. Despite his perverted behavior, Sungreal offered a crucial observation. He pointed out that the girl next to the president didn't look like a fellow adventurer. She looked genuinely injured. When Kim suggested she might have been hurt in a fight, the old man corrected him. He explained that while the game sends pain signals to the brain, it doesn't leave physical marks on the body. From his low vantage point, he had seen evidence of physical abuse that must have originated in the real world. The revelation made Kim pause. After a moment of silence, he shouted at Kim to stop, calling the powerful man pathetic for kidnapping someone in broad daylight. He declared that such behavior was a disgrace. Kim turned calmly, feigning ignorance and warning the boy that making false accusations could lead to dangerous misunderstandings. Kim mocked the president's polite tone before dropping the act. He accused Kim of hiding his lawlessness behind his status as a CEO. Then, in a shocking move that left Catherine stunned, Kim announced to the crowd that she was actually his girlfriend, implying that they had already been intimate to prove their relationship. The onlookers immediately began to gossip, speculating that if the claims were true, a massive scandal would ensue. However, many remained skeptical, dismissing the accusations as fake news due to the lack of evidence. Ki-moon remained entirely unfazed, showing no emotion as he calmly stated that the boy must be confusing him with someone else. He attempted to end the conversation there, claiming he was in a hurry to leave. Kim stepped in his path, refusing to let him go. He demanded to know the nature of Ki-moon's relationship with the girl if she wasn't his girlfriend, pointing out how suspicious it looked for an older man to be teamed up with a young woman in such revealing clothing. He boldly labeled the president a dirty old man, a sentiment that resonated with the crowd, who began to agree that the situation was indeed peculiar. Ki-moon sighed, dismissing the insults as unworthy of a response, and turned to walk away again. However, he was interrupted by the sudden arrival of Sunreal, the cunning old con artist. Stepping into the spotlight, he introduced himself as Patrick Sunreal, a loyal employee of the Samsung Group. He dramatically knelt before Catherine, taking her hands gently and proclaiming his relief that the company's legitimate heir was safe, calling her the future of the corporation. Catherine stood there in stunned silence, completely confused by the performance. The crowd's confusion deepened as they tried to reconcile the conflicting stories. They wondered if she really was the president's daughter, and if so, whether someone like her could be trusted with such a massive company, especially since Ki-moon had just claimed she was merely a stranger he had grouped with. Sensing that the situation was turning against the president, Kim approached him and quietly suggested a way out. He advised Ki-moon to admit she was his daughter and blame the situation on parenting mistakes, which would allow them to spin the narrative into a redemption story. Kim even promised to act like a lunatic to help sell the lie, but warned that if Ki-moon didn't cooperate, he would expose the dark truth about their relationship. Ki-moon glared at him, coldly asking why anyone would value the boy's word. Suddenly, he stomped his foot, unleashing a powerful ability that projected his booming voice across the entire plaza, leaving Kim stunned by the sheer volume. Addressing the city, Ki-moon declared that the man dressed as a butler did not work for his company, and that the girl on the ground was a stranger he had only met that day. He accused the three of them of conspiring to destroy his reputation, and announced that, as the leader of the Sun Young group, he would execute them all right there for their crimes. Brody activated player killer mode, declaring that he intended to demonstrate exactly what happened to people who falsely claimed to know him. However, his threat was cut short when the goblin, Goblito, punched him squarely in the face. The impact sent Catherine's father flying into a nearby wall, where he exploded upon impact, much to the protagonist's relief, who celebrated arriving just in time. The situation quickly became awkward when the goblin began walking toward him. Fearing that the crowd would realize they were allies, the protagonist knew he had to act fast. As soon as the creature got close enough, he used his goblin throw skill, launching the monster high into the sky until it disappeared from view. To maintain his cover, he shouted to the onlookers that the goblin was a dangerous, crazy creature, and claimed he had no idea where it came from, adding that it was fortunate he had managed to throw it away. The crowd was left confused, unable to comprehend how the boy had effortlessly tossed a monster that had just killed a knight with a single blow. Ignoring their bewilderment, the protagonist approached Catherine and ordered her to stand up. She panicked, begging him to let her go and accusing him of having no real intention of saving her. Gripping her chin, he told her firmly that the choice to leave or stay was his alone. He clarified that he wasn't a knight in shining armor and warned her that this place was full of trash people, himself included. He dismissed her father's fate as payment for past sins and told her that, with the whole world watching, she finally had an opportunity to take her revenge. Suddenly, his demeanor shifted completely. He peered at her closely and announced that, upon further inspection, she wasn't actually his girlfriend after all. Feigning embarrassment, he gave an awkward laugh and walked away. Despite his rough acting, he had behaved like a true gentleman, saving her from her father while ensuring no one would mistakenly link them together. Encouraged by a bystander to speak her mind, Catherine slowly rose, closed her eyes for a moment, and then formally introduced herself to the crowd. The scene later shifted to news reports exposing the abuse within the famous corporate family. The protagonist watched on TV and social media as Catherine posted photos of her injuries and admitted that she had wanted to end her life. As a direct result of the scandal, the company's stock value plummeted, while her father conveniently claimed he was too sick to provide any interviews. Although the situation initially seemed like a happy ending, the protagonist remained terrified, convinced that the wealthy tycoon would hire a hitman to kill him in his sleep. When he voiced these fears to Somryu, the older man simply requested that he keep his voice down to match the restaurant's refined atmosphere. Somryu reasoned that since photos of their fight were already spreading virally, the rich man would be the prime suspect if the boy suddenly disappeared. Despite this logic, the protagonist glared at him and began to tear up, insisting that he had made a terrible mistake by making himself a target. Somryu tried to comfort him by claiming that the moral value of his actions exceeded any monetary reward, but the boy remained skeptical, refusing to trust anything the con artist said. Curious about Somryu's sudden change in appearance, the protagonist asked why he was dressed like a professional butler and where he had obtained the suit, knowing he didn't own such clothes. Somryu took a calm sip of tea and admitted he had done the obvious thing. He stole them. The boy realized with resignation that his companion was likely going to get arrested all over again. Moments later, Catherine's butler approached their table. The protagonist mockingly greeted him as a lackey, but the man ignored the insult, explaining that he had come solely to express his gratitude. He acknowledged that the young lady had only regained consciousness thanks to the boy's efforts and expressed deep regret for not noticing her suffering during his years of service. Sensing an opportunity, the protagonist smirked and suggested that such an impressive feat deserved a financial reward. However, the butler sighed and revealed that he was no longer employed by the group, leaving him with no funds to pay a bounty. When the protagonist protested, arguing that he deserved compensation for the danger he was now in, the butler calmly explained that Catherine shared the same fear of revenge. To protect herself through public visibility, she had begun streaming on Twitch. As the protagonist looked on in confusion, the butler revealed that he had used his severance pay to build her a studio, believing that fame would serve as her shield. On screen, Catherine asked her chat if they wanted a dance reaction, having already amassed 360,000 viewers. Although the butler insisted she was merely enduring the situation bravely, the protagonist watched her dance and noted that, given how much she was accentuating her hips, she seemed to be enjoying herself quite a bit. The butler expressed his deep gratitude, explaining that the young lady was finally recovering and reclaiming the life she had been denied for so long. He insisted that this turnaround was entirely due to the protagonist's efforts. However, Zekin felt awkward and annoyed by the sentimental speech, bluntly telling the man to cut the mushy talk. He added that if the butler really wanted to thank him, a large pile of cash would be much more appreciated. Smiling, the butler told the kid to relax, revealing that Catherine had prepared a reward for him that was even better than money. While they stood there, the donation alerts on Catherine's stream began to go crazy. Zekin watched in confusion as massive sums poured in from users with names like Catherine's boyfriend and Catherine's love. On screen, she was dancing with professional skill, announcing that she would perform the motorbike dance next. Observing her natural talent as an entertainer, the butler mused that perhaps she wasn't meant to inherit a corporation, but rather to build her own empire, a thought that highlighted why influencers often earned more than doctors. Later, Zekin arrived at the post office and asked the blonde clerk if any deliveries had arrived for him. She smiled initially, confirming she had kept an amazing item safe for him, but her demeanor changed completely when she returned with the package. Fuming, she asked if he was out of his mind. The item turned out to be a cursed whip crafted from the flesh of a bloodworm. Although rare, using it would cause the wielder to lose their sanity instantly. Furthermore, rejecting the curse would trigger random negative effects and cause summoned creatures to go berserk. Zekin realized with frustration that the conniving woman had tricked him by gifting him such a dangerous item. The scene then shifted to the quest manager, who informed Zekin that his next mission was to wipe out the goblin village. Zekin was stunned, and with Goblito standing right there, he asked the man to repeat the order. The manager confirmed that he must destroy the village, explaining that the goblins were evil creatures who had been burning towns and killing everyone who got close. Zekin tried to comfort his summon, placing a hand on Goblito's head and explaining that goblin deaths were an unavoidable part of the game's destiny. However, Goblito looked deeply hurt rather than reassured, causing Zekin to worry. As they prepared to leave, Zekin noticed a merchant dragging a chicken because all the horses had disappeared. Once inside the carriage, Zekin tried to address the tension, asking if Goblito's strange behavior was because he had thrown him away after the fight with the knight. When the goblin turned his back and pretended not to hear, Zekin began to get angry at the attitude. Suddenly, he remembered the blue-haired girl's warning that one-sided relationships always end. The realization hit him hard. Deciding he didn't want to argue anymore, he muttered that he was ready to end the conflict once and for all by making a formal oath. Chaos erupted inside the carriage when a goblin wielding a mace climbed aboard, triggering an explosion that signaled a broader ambush. Zekin found himself surrounded as the creatures destroyed the vehicle. One charged directly at him, while another struck from behind, biting him hard enough to deal 173 damage. He managed to grab the attacker by the torso and throw it aside just as his own goblin summon stepped forward to defend him. Amidst the commotion, The driver yelled from the front to ask what was happening. Zekken shouted back that a goblin was attacking him, but the driver remained frustratingly calm, noting that they were near the village and promising to take the creature out with a single shot. Despite Zekken's plea for him to aim carefully, the man fired recklessly. The bullet grazed Zekken, causing him to faceplant, though the shot luckily caused the enemy to miss its swing. Zekken was stunned when the attacking creature began to cry and beg for forgiveness, explaining that it had only attacked because it believed its friend, Zekken's summon, had been captured. The realization that he could understand the creature's language because of his class as a goblin summoner shocked him, and he worried that others might mistake him for a monster. Later, as the carriage continued its journey, Zekken kept the captive tied up. When the goblin pleaded to be released, insisting he was only trying to help a friend, Zekken refused, angrily pointing out that the creature had bitten his head and vowing to wipe out the entire village himself. Eventually, the driver announced they had arrived and dropped Zekken off near the path to the village before instantly vanishing with a warning that the road ahead would be difficult. Holding the squirming captive like a rabbit, Zekken decided to keep him alive to trigger any traps they might encounter. The terrified goblin begged Zekken to kill him, but spare the rest of the village, asking if he wouldn't try to save a captured human friend. Zekken coldly pulled the creature's ear and replied that he would simply let a friend die. Trembling, the goblin insisted that his race was peaceful and questioned why humans constantly tormented them. This caused Zekken to pause and reflect on his motivations. He realized he was only planning to kill them because the quest giver had ordered it, not because he had witnessed them doing anything evil. He had simply assumed they were bad because they were goblins. Just as he wondered if anyone actually cared about a goblin's family, a mother and her child suddenly appeared, calling out for their captured loved one. Zekken froze in his tracks, stunned that he had just heard the word love coming from the creature. The injured captive immediately screamed at his family, specifically naming Tan and Manson, urging them to abandon him and run for their lives. However, Zekken silenced the group and ordered his own summon, Goblito, to hurl rocks in their direction. Goblito obeyed, cracking a stone and firing it like a bullet at the family. At that exact moment, Zekken released the captive, who dashed forward and dove like a goalkeeper to intercept the projectile. Fortunately, the rock struck the goblin's back rather than his head, sparing him a fatal injury. Exhausted by the emotional weight of the situation, Zekken realized he couldn't bring himself to kill someone willing to use their own body as a shield to protect their family. He felt that doing so would be too cruel. Reflecting on the Goblin Lord's previous insults, he admitted to himself that, morally speaking, he was actually worse than these creatures. Later, as they entered the settlement, a voice welcomed him to the goblin village. Zekken looked around and realized the locals were staring because he was the only human there. When he heard whispers about how ugly he was, he snapped that he wasn't a goblin, but the host, the goblin he had saved, laughed and explained that he had introduced Zekken as a white goblin because no one would believe a human could look like that. Although Zekken grumbled that he wanted to leave to attend to other matters, the host insisted that he stay for a celebratory meal. Inside the house, the family served a steaming bowl of goblin venom soup, a name that understandably made Zekken nervous. While the mother scolded her children to behave in front of the guest, Zekken consoled himself with the fact that the game didn't simulate taste. However, just as he lifted his spoon, one of the kids bumped his arm, causing the soup to splash onto his face and instantly draining 169 HP. As Zekken's summon laughed hysterically at the mishap, Zekken shouted for him to be quiet. The host then asked curiously how a human and a goblin managed to travel together. Zekken scoffed at the implication of friendship, clarifying that he had summoned the creature and that it was merely a subordinate. The host admitted he didn't understand summoning magic, but confessed that he envied them. If he could be an adventurer, he would be the most successful goblin alive. He explained sadly that he and his family, like everyone else in the village, were destined to never leave that place. Zekken understood that their fate was to remain stuck in a low-level dungeon forever because they were viewed as trash mobs. However, seeing the host's wife comfort him, Zekken told the goblin not to hang his head, pointing out that he was lucky to have a loving partner. Internally, the protagonist compared himself to the goblin. Unlike the brave creature who had thrown himself in front of a carriage to save a friend, Kim had no family or friends and felt pathetic by comparison. Convinced that the host had a brighter future than he did, he told Goblito that the two goblins were alike and would both go far in life. Despite the emotional atmosphere, the mother suddenly swung a sickle from behind the protagonist. He managed to dodge the strike and looked at her in confusion, but she quickly pointed to a cockroach scurrying across the table, claiming she had only been trying to kill the insect. Unbeknownst to the protagonist, a muscular goblin child was hiding under the table clutching a knife. When the original Goblito slapped the table to squash the roach, the force of the blow dealt 9999 damage, instantly killing the hidden child. A second child beneath the table attempted to take revenge, but the protagonist also took a swing at the insect. He noted that he felt an impact dealing 459 damage, unaware that both children under the table were now dead. The protagonist announced that he had to leave for urgent business, though he wished he could stay longer. The goblin parents, hiding their true feelings, wished him a safe trip, leading the boy to believe that goblins were genuinely kind monsters. He innocently told them to take care of their children, but the moment was shattered when a goblin corpse fell in front of them. An adventurer appeared, announcing he had found another target, creating a chaotic misunderstanding where the protagonist believed the goblins were good, while the adventurer saw them as prey. Recognizing the orange-haired arrival as James, someone he had once cooked for, the protagonist listened, as the man assumed he was a fellow player farming for quests. James pointed out the goblin family, suggesting there were plenty of targets if he wanted help. Furious, the protagonist entered villain mode, activated player killer status, and ordered Goblito to attack the intruder. However, the summon kicked the goblin father instead, launching him toward the adventurer where he was struck in midair and died screaming. While the protagonist yelled at his summon for attacking the creature instead of the human, Goblito simply laughed. The confused adventurer asked why the protagonist was acting crazy and defending monsters that weren't his friends. Ignoring the logic, the protagonist accused the man of killing his friend without cause and punched him in the face, dealing 78 damage. Following an explosion in the cave, the perspective shifted to a group below. Zeros, a level 35 hero, asked about Mitchell's whereabouts, while a level 36 fighter named Haiyin noted that Mitchell was tearing through the area, killing the weak goblins in a single hit and forcing the rest to hide. Haiyin was startled when a body suddenly exploded right in front of her. From his vantage point above, Mitchell shouted for them to finish off the guy, explaining that the fool had claimed the goblins were his friends before launching a surprise attack. He added that the bastard had activated PK mode without even landing a hit, only to run away and fall off the mountain like an idiot. Mitchell remarked that it made sense for someone that stupid to befriend goblins. Approaching the crushed protagonist, Haiyin commented that his ugliness was so severe he could pass for a goblin himself, suggesting he might even count toward their quest completion. Zeros agreed, deciding it was best to eliminate him before he caused further issues. Meanwhile, Mitchell entered the house and snapped that he was finished wasting time on tedious extermination missions. He abruptly stabbed the goblin mother, killing her instantly, which caused the original Goblito to burst into hysterical laughter. Mitchell expressed his disgust, stating that even though it was a game, he hated seeing people laugh while a race was slaughtered, pointing out the dead children under the table as proof of their inaction. He declared that people like the protagonist deserved to be exterminated. Suddenly, another explosion rocked the area above, and while Zeros shouted for haste, Mitchell growled that he was done killing goblins. However, Seekin began laughing so hard he could barely breathe, asking if they really thought this quest would be a walk in the park. He challenged them to fight the goblin above, and when they looked up, they saw Goblito holding Mitchell by his hair. The beautiful Haiyin immediately leapt in to deliver a kick, while Seekin muttered for his summon to take his time and not kill her in a single hit. To everyone's shock, the creature began chewing on her foot. Just as Seekin noted that Goblito was about to crush her, Zeros rushed in with an explosive slash, forcing the monster to let go. Visibly shaken, Haiyin explained that the weird creature had somehow blocked her kick with its mouth. Zeros thanked her with sarcasm, reminding her that she had just complained about enemies dying too easily, yet now she had found one that fought back. Although she claimed she wasn't scared, she admitted the little freak was far too strong for its size. Seekin continued to laugh manically, taunting Mitchell that his friends were delusional if they thought they stood a chance. He announced that they would all learn the shame of losing to a monster usually considered weak. Haiyin snapped at him to be quiet, but Seekin grinned, warning them that they didn't understand the true nature of goblins. He insisted that the creatures were innocent, kind, and never betrayed their friends, promising that the adventurers would now face the consequences of their actions. Unimpressed, Zeros muttered for them to forget the kid and focus on the goblin. He stepped forward with his aura flaring, convinced the boy was speaking nonsense. Seekin shouted for Goblito to finish the fight, but the creature simply sat down and scratched his belly, looking completely uninterested. It turned out that Goblito was actually the wise one. He understood that the adventurers weren't the real enemy, and that fighting them was pointless unless they attacked first. Unaware of the reality of the situation, Seekin slid forward on his knees and desperately pleaded with Goblito. He heaped praise upon the creature, calling him the ruler of all and begging him to defeat their enemies, terrified that if the goblin stopped listening, he would lose all his progress and dignity. When Goblito signaled for him to lift his head, Seekin stammered out an apology for having bossed him around in the past, promising to never give orders again and even offering to give the goblin the larger portion of their shared food. Hai watched the scene in confusion, unable to understand why the man who had just been commanding the monster was now kneeling before it. Just as Zeros opened his mouth to comment on the bizarre spectacle, he was instantly hit for 99,999 damage. While Hai stared in shock at her fallen companion, Seekin smiled and declared that his prayers had been answered. A system message appeared, confirming that the Goblin Lord was pleased with his humility and awarding him a goblin point. Seekin turned his attention to Hai, announcing that it was her turn. Trembling, she couldn't comprehend how a creature from a low-level quest could defeat Zeros in a single strike. Feeling the situation was completely unfair, she decided to run, shouting that she needed to regroup with her team in town to form a new plan. But Seekin looked at her with pity, knowing escape was impossible after confronting Goblito. Suddenly, something snatched her ankle, sending her face first into the dirt. With his arms spread wide, Seekin proclaimed that their time of oppression had ended. He declared that there would be no more missions of destruction or living trapped in that cursed place because their leader had arrived. He announced that their new goal was the total defeat of humanity. As Hai shook with fear on the ground, Seekin ordered every goblin in the city to gather, marking the beginning of the rebellion. The scene shifted to the walls of Albaster, where two soldiers were casually discussing goblins. Before they could finish their conversation, they spotted smoke rising on the horizon and realized the green horde was charging at full speed. One soldier yelled that the infinite goblin army was approaching as they saw Seekin riding at the front, vowing to defeat every human in the city. However, a flashback revealed that 3 hours earlier, when the goblins were chanting to attack the helpless woman, Seekin had intervened. He reasoned that killing her would only allow her to respawn and escape, which was too easy given her crimes against their race. He taunted her, suggesting that her friends had likely fainted in real life from the shock, and asked if she wanted to feel that same pain. Seeing her terror, Seekin smirked and told her she would help him lead the army. He confiscated her money and weapons, warning her not to log out if she wanted them back. She reluctantly agreed to cooperate on the condition that he return everything later, and he proceeded to ride into battle using her as a mount. Back in the present, panic spread elsewhere in the city as someone burst into a tavern, screaming that they were being invaded. At the Adventurers Guild, a burly warrior scoffed at the news, finding the idea of a goblin invasion ridiculous. Sitting nearby, a scholar adjusted his glasses and dismissed the threat, muttering that such beginner-level monsters were nothing to worry about. Iron, the blue-haired elf, agreed with the sentiment, suggesting that the city guards could easily handle the situation without their interference. Meanwhile, a team of adventurers in blue uniforms leaned against a wall, speculating that the attack might be a special event intended for entertainment. However, the redhead in their group snapped at them, insisting they didn't have time for nonsense because they needed to prepare for an upcoming dungeon raid. Trying to mediate, a blonde man urged everyone to relax, reasoning that they should at least investigate for self-defense purposes. His sentence was barely finished when a goblin crashed through the window. The man instinctively drew his gun and killed it with a single shot, confirming with disbelief that a real invasion was underway. A spiky-haired man, whose username was a chaotic string of letters like ASFD, admitted he thought it was a joke until dozens more poured inside. As the level 58 Flame Knight and Guild Master of Hellfire, he drew his burning sword and began slicing through the waves of enemies, laughing as he farmed kills. He joked about the fun event, estimating there were hundreds of them, but Jamini, a level 52 mage, shouted a correction. The scholar realized the number wasn't hundreds, but tens of thousands. Suddenly, the tavern was overrun by a sea of green bodies, drowning the swordsman before he could even swing his weapon. Horace Philiver, the level 62 sniper and master of the Armstrong Guild, shouted that the city was in genuine peril. Standing beside him, his vice leader, Charlotte Stone, calmly touched the beauty mark near her lip and agreed, though she strangely told him that was exactly why he needed to stay put. Horace stared at her in confusion, but the conversation was cut short by Iron. Deciding these creatures weren't as cute as previous ones, the elf stood up and summoned her familiar Michelle, a massive hybrid of a wolf and a cat. The beast immediately burst onto the streets, tearing through the invaders by the dozen. Elsewhere, Zekken commanded the goblin army to press the attack, desperate to make humanity feel the same humiliation his kind had suffered. However, the girl serving as his mount panicked and accidentally punched a goblin, killing it instantly. She realized that at level 34, she was far stronger than these weak creatures. Other adventurers quickly noticed the same thing. Despite the sheer numbers, the individual monsters were frail. The tide turned as the goblins began to tremble, while players shifted from panic to arrogance, laughing that they would level up massively today. Archers and mages launched fireballs and explosions, decimating the ranks. Shocked by how quickly the humans regained their confidence, Zekken rushed to the great goblin, begging the powerful entity to lend a fraction of his strength to save them. While Hai whispered in shock that she should log out, the great goblin stood tall amidst the fire. He handed his mace to a subordinate and walked calmly through the flames. A bald adventurer struck the monster directly in the forehead, but the beast remained completely unfazed. A split second later, 3 adventurers were blown to pieces. Smirking at the carnage, Zekken remarked that this was the price for messing with goblins as the army marched forward over the piling corpses. Zekken waved his hands frantically, ordering the horde to stop beating the corpses, but his commands fell on deaf ears. When he saw a group dragging a woman into an alley by her hair, he yelled at them to desist and grabbed one by the shoulder. The creature immediately spun around and bit his hand, forcing Zekken to realize that these monsters had gone completely feral and were beyond control. Suddenly, a blinding slash cut through the chaos, marking the arrival of Shin, the ridiculously overpowered warrior said to be level 9999. He marched forward, effortlessly cutting down every goblin in his path. Upon recognizing Zekken, Shin demanded to know the reason behind the invasion and if the boy had any knowledge of it, but Zekken simply shook his head and claimed he had no idea. Frowning at the sheer number of enemies, Shin noted that even weak monsters could overwhelm the city if unchecked, so he declared his intention to end the battle with a single strike. Zekken intervened, arguing that the goblins were only retaliating because humans constantly posted quests to slaughter them even when they were innocent. Shin dismissed this, asserting that they were evil and needed to be exterminated. When Zekken accused him of never having spoken to one, Shin looked confused, questioning why he would converse with creatures whose minds were corrupted by greed. Zekken exploded in anger, insisting that goblins had families and raised children, making them more human than most people. However, Shin maintained a cold demeanor, explaining that their domestic life was merely a facade designed to trick adventurers. He revealed that goblins were monsters born from the abyss, incapable of natural reproduction. While he admitted they shouldn't be completely wiped out because they served a role in the world's balance, he insisted that their settlements had to be culled to prevent them from threatening the general population. Zekken called him a liar, asking if he felt no remorse for the thousands he had killed, but Shin simply sighed. He told the kid that if he had ever actually lived in a goblin home, they would have likely served him poison. That comment stopped Zekken in his tracks. He suddenly recalled the goblin venom soup, the mother's accidental swing with a sickle, and the child hiding under the table with a knife. It finally clicked that in this game world, the family dynamic was a lie from the start, and he had been fooled by their mimicry. Wide-eyed with realization, he bolted toward Hyane, who stood nervously under the streetlights, wondering if she should flee. Zekken leapt behind her and declared that plans had changed. He grabbed the original Goblito, activated his healing ability, and shouted for the army to listen to their messiah and cease fighting. However, the rampage continued. The goblins ignored him completely, smashing skulls against the pavement as Zekken realized the situation had spiraled out of his control. A nearby adventurer gave Zekken a suspicious look, asking why he was gripping the goblin by the armpits in such a strange way. Panicking that his cover might be blown, Zekken immediately improvised by performing a wrestling move, slamming the creature's head into the ground and claiming it was his special attack. The stranger burst out laughing at the insane suplex, joking that for a second, he had suspected Zekken was the one behind the invasion. Zekken froze, terrified by how accurately the man had guessed. After the adventurer walked away, the dazed goblin ace stumbled to his feet, but Zekken quickly lied, insisting he hadn't attacked him, but had merely tripped backward. Suddenly, the original goblin appeared holding a rock and tried to smack Zekken across the face. However, Zekken yanked Hyane in front of him at the last second, causing her to take the blow directly to her mouth. Solemnly mocking her brave sacrifice, he tossed her aside before turning his rage on the attacker, asking if the bastard had really just thrown a rock at him. Losing his patience, Zekken hurled the next rock high into the sky, catching Irene's attention from a distance. She looked down and was horrified to see Zekken standing before the goblin with a cursed whip strapped to his back, realizing he had forgotten to remove it. As the negative effect triggered, Zekken's eyes turned blood red. He laughed manically, shouting that he finally understood why Catherine gave him the weapon. It was meant to beat the hell out of the creature. Ignoring Irene's scream as she rushed toward him, he raised the whip and struck, causing a massive explosion. Meanwhile, downtown was in total chaos as Asfed laughed while slashing through thousands of goblins, calling the slaughter a mere warm-up. His companion Gemini warned him to focus because his healing magic was reaching its limit and other adventurers were dying, but Asfad grinned and dismissed the concern. He argued that if they died, it was simply because they were weak, and only the strong deserved to survive. Nearby, Horace the sniper cheered after landing his 100th consecutive headshot. His vice captain, Charlotte, frowned and told him to calm down, noting that while she was recording everything, he had fired 100 shots to kill 99 monsters. Horace smirked and corrected her just as a bullet flew past her face to kill a goblin lunging from behind. As blood splattered on the wall, he reloaded and told her that particular kill was for her. The streets remained a mess of fire and confusion as Asfed found himself surrounded. Clenching his flaming sword, he declared he would show them how real farming was done. While most goblins froze in fear, Gemini warned his leader that something was approaching. A pale, deranged creature with glowing eyes emerged from the crowd, prompting the scholar to shout a warning. However, Asfed had already leaped forward to unleash his explosive meteor attack. A pillar of fire consumed the city, and Asfed laughed hysterically, claiming that whether it was a goblin or a dragon, everything burned the same. His laughter died when a single footstep echoed from the blaze. He stared in disbelief as the creature walked out completely unscathed. It turned out that moments earlier, Zekken had ignored Irene's desperate pleas to stop and had cracked the cursed whip straight into Goblito's head. A massive crimson aura exploded toward the sky, signaling to Irene that she had arrived too late. She screamed at Zekken, questioning his stupidity and demanding he dismiss the creature immediately, but it was no use. His eyes rolled back in his head as a system alert flashed, confirming that he had fallen unconscious. At that moment, Gobbletoad completely lost his mind. Although Irene noted that the enraged state drastically boosted a monster's stats, she remained confident she could handle a creature of that level until it lunged at her, nearly biting her face off. She barely managed to jump back in time. The real danger of the berserk state was that the summoned creature no longer recognized its master. In the chaos, her cat familiar bit the protagonist and spat him out, only for Irene to summon a bird that swooped in to catch him in midair. Despite the rescue, Gobbletoad charged at full speed. Irene ordered her familiar, Michelle, to lightly hit the boy to wake him up, but the creature was forced to defend itself against the goblin instead. The impact dealt a devastating 99 damage, leaving Michelle frozen in shock. As the monster slammed into the ground and prepared for another assault, Irene summoned a jagged spirit to raise an elemental barrier. However, Gobbletoad wound up a massive punch and shattered the defense like glass. The force of the blow sent Irene, the boy, and her bird flying backward, confirming that the damage numbers she had seen were real. Realizing that people would get seriously hurt if Zekken didn't unsummon the goblins soon, she shouted for Romy to get them out of there. The bird rocketed skyward, but Gobbletoad slammed his fists into the earth, launching a storm of boulders that he then hurled like bullets. Although Romy dodged the initial volley, one stone struck like a sniper shot, dealing another massive hit. As they plummeted toward the ground, Irene muttered that she knew their next meeting would be interesting, reaching out to pull the boy close just before the explosive impact. Meanwhile, the raging Gobbletoad continued his rampage through the city until he encountered Asfed. Standing amidst the flames, the knight was astonished that the monster had survived his earlier meteor attack. He activated his eternal flame might and prepared to charge, ignoring a warning from Gemini that this creature was different and required a special ability. Asfad snapped at his subordinate to be quiet, insisting that accepting help was synonymous with losing. While Gemini muttered about how his master, supposedly a genius with a 160 IQ, always rushed in like an idiot, Asfad brought his blazing sword down. The monster simply offered a twisted, feral grin, and a moment later, the horizon flashed as massive damage numbers erupted across the screen. The other adventurers stood frozen in disbelief, with Horace and Charlotte exchanging worried glances over the anomaly they had just witnessed. Gemini remained paralyzed by the sight of such maximum damage output, knowing that pain feedback exceeding HP limits usually fried a player's sensory system and forced them into immediate retirement. Just as he began screaming in fear that his master was dead, a hand landed on his head. It was Asfad, alive and grinning, who told him to stop crying. He mocked the scholar's strategy, challenging his supposed 160 IQ to devise a plan against a monster capable of dealing millions in damage per hit. Gemini admitted that while retreating was the only logical option in an impossible fight, they might be able to land a single hit if they found a gap in the enemy's resistance. Asfad's eyes lit up at the high-stakes gamble. Deciding to end the battle with his next move, he charged forward engulfed in flames, ignoring Gemini's desperate shouts to wait for the signal, since attacking first had proven futile for everyone else. Although the monster's broken mechanics allowed it to deal massive damage effortlessly, Asfad relied on his legendary Eternal Fire King skill, which ignored defense to inflict pure direct damage. As the goblin turned with a terrifying grin and leaped into the air, Gemini realized he had to support his master's reckless pride. He activated a scholar ability that spread a glowing sigil across the ground like an antenna field, creating a domain where everything had to obey his commands. He then triggered Forced Halt, a control spell designed to freeze a target for 8 seconds, though he knew the duration would be shorter against such a powerful foe. As the goblin's shadow blotted out the light, Gemini gave the signal. Asfad muttered that he hadn't expected the enemy to be so strong, but he committed fully to the attack by dropping his health to a single point to maximize his damage multiplier. He slammed into the beast, dealing 347,540 damage, yet the creature merely twitched its head in mockery as if the hit were nothing. Barely 2 seconds after the freeze spell activated, the goblin broke free and swung down to counterattack. Right before impact, Gemini used realignment to teleport his master to safety at the very last second. Furious, the scholar yelled over the party chat that risking their real lives in a game was insane, warning that they would both die if Asfad kept this up. The surrounding players agreed. Seeing the goblin take over 300,000 damage without a scratch terrified them, prompting many to disconnect immediately to avoid the lethal feedback. Witnessing the futility of the fight, Horace suggested to Charlotte that they should bail as well. She agreed, noting that it was the first smart thing he had said, and began the log-out process. Charlotte glanced sideways and realized that Horace had lied to her. He wasn't logging out at all, but had simply tricked her into leaving. Since disconnecting triggered a 10-minute server penalty preventing players from returning, she was now effectively locked out of the fight. Meanwhile, Asfad was busy celebrating the damage he had dealt, claiming he had taken half the enemy's health, but Gemini remained silent. When Asfad asked if he wanted to quit, the scholar snapped back, calling his master insane and warning that with his teleportation skill on cooldown, they couldn't survive another hit. Just as Gemini tried to explain the goblin's attack pattern, a massive boulder flew toward Asfad's head. He didn't even have time to react, but Horace intervened, shooting the rock into dust mid-air. The sniper commented on how nasty the attack looked and offered to assist, but only on the condition that he kept all the rewards. Asfad smirked and agreed, admitting that preserving his pride wasn't a priority in such a desperate fight. Horace cracked his neck and joined the fray, firing rounds from the back with effortless confidence. Although he laughed about the fight becoming unfair, his bullet struck Gobleto's back for 0 damage. However, the distraction allowed Asfad to flank the creature and strike with his Eternal Fire, dealing a massive 412,000 damage. The resulting explosion decimated half the street, leaving Gemini stunned by their recklessness. He realized these two weren't retreating because they simply didn't fear death. Undeterred by the flames, Gobleto charged again at full speed. At that moment, the protagonist, Zekken, regained consciousness, groaning as he clutched his head. He noticed his hands were resting on something soft, which he initially mistook for goblin heads, only to realize he had landed on Irian, who had served as a human airbag. She shoved him off furiously, embarrassed and angry that he had woken up only to squeeze her chest. Irian demanded to know the truth about the childlike goblin and insisted that he unsummon the creature immediately. When Zekken looked confused, she explained that he had used the cursed blood whip without removing the curse, causing him to black out and sending his pet into a violent rampage. She argued that for the sake of the heartbroken creature and the safety of others, he had to stop it. Zekken admitted that he couldn't. There was no unsummon button for this specific pet, and the command had never existed. Irian stared at him in disbelief, unable to comprehend a summoner without control over his unit. When Zekken muttered that he wanted to get rid of it more than anyone, she accused him of cruelty. He snapped back, telling her that she was the one at fault for getting too attached and sticking her nose where it didn't belong. Zekken rationalized his indifference by claiming that most of the people around him had either already hurt him or would do so eventually, so he didn't care if they suffered a little now. He advised Irene to worry about herself instead, noting that the monster was no longer susceptible to physical or mental damage. His rant was abruptly cut short when an attack launched Goblito's body backward through the air. Zekken turned to see the damage display showing a massive 780,000 points, causing him to panic and wonder if the creature really was invincible or if it actually had a limit. Asvad strolled forward, grinning with confidence, and asked why Zekken had been hiding such a powerful monster. However, Goblito landed perfectly on his feet with glowing eyes and immediately charged again. Asvad smirked, raising his blade to deliver a final blow, but he cursed aloud when he realized too late that he was completely out of mana. In an instant, the goblin was right in front of him, grabbing his face with both hands. Fortunately, Gemini's realignment skill had finished cooling down just in time to teleport Asvad to safety at the last second. Furious, Gemini screamed at his master, punching him in the chest and demanding to know why he had dropped his sword instead of winning as promised. Asvad glared back through sweat and tears, asking why Gemini was risking his life, but the subordinate yelled at him to shut up, arguing that screaming like a lunatic made them look like losers. Turning to Horus, Gemini announced he was quitting. Horus sighed and agreed, deciding to leave as well because the situation was no longer entertaining. Asvad looked into the distance and saw a trail of smoke approaching. It was Zekken, sprinting for his life with an entire army of goblins chasing him. Asvad froze when he saw that Goblito had taken another 800,000 damage, realizing that if the monster died, Zekken would lose everything. He considered using his recall skill, but Irene stopped him, insisting that they needed to remove the rage debuff first, rather than simply unsummoning the creature. When Zekken questioned her logic, pointing to the massive damage caused by the Fire Guild's master, Irene explained that in this world, pets usually vanish and respawn later when their HP hits 0. However, Zekken reminded her that his goblin didn't follow the standard rules. Realizing that he was risking his life for the creature, Irene listened as Zekken's voice broke with desperation. He snapped that the goblin was the only thing keeping him alive, and that he refused to return to a reality where he didn't exist. Although he was screaming out of pure selfishness, Irene looked at him with deep admiration, as if she were watching someone rescue a helpless puppy. Misinterpreting his desperation as deep affection, Irene marveled at how Zekken seemed to value the goblin's life more than his own. She felt certain that if he had been the master of her own deceased pet, it would still be alive today. Looking stunning in the moment, she gently took his hand and apologized, promising that she would not let his beloved companion die and that she would change the situation no matter the cost. Zekken, however, pulled his hand away sharply, telling her not to act like she knew what to do unless she had a concrete plan. Irene insisted she had a solution. She explained that after analyzing the creature, she realized an enraged monster behaved much like a neglected pet. Consequently, the fastest way to reach its heart was through its stomach. Although Zekken was initially skeptical about feeding it, he suddenly recalled a past battle where Goblito had abandoned the fight to chase after food he had thrown. Realizing he hadn't fed the creature since that day, he quickly retrieved a snack from his inventory, wondering if the tactic might work again. Muttering that it had been ages since the goblin last ate, Zekken took off running. Irene called out to him, confused why he didn't just summon the creature if he had food, but she froze when she saw a massive horde rushing past. Zekken sprinted for his life with Goblito hot on his heels, eyeing the item in his hand. The Goblin's Sausage Deluxe, a legendary treat rumored to be so delicious it could convince a divorced goblin wife to return home. The scent drove every goblin in sight into a mania, and they chased him with tongues hanging out, drooling uncontrollably. Watching the chaos from a distance, Asgad was completely confused, while Horus smirked at the starving mob and decided it was time to leave. As Zekken thundered past them, Asgad sacrificed Giamini by tossing him into the air to cover his own escape. Giamini went down fighting but ultimately died to the swarm after taking a pitiful 28 damage. Eventually, Zekken found himself surrounded and out of breath. He shouted at the red-glowing creature for leaving without permission, then held out the sausage, urging Goblito to eat quickly because they were short on time. Drooling saliva, the wild-eyed goblin leaned in to take a bite as Zekken praised him. However, before he could eat, the rest of the horde crashed into them, fighting desperately to snatch the food. Zekken was instantly trampled, taking continuous damage as he lay trapped beneath the crowd, while Goblito struggled in vain to reach the sausage. As he was crushed by the weight of the mob, Zekken screamed that the world was trying to kill him, suddenly realizing that Shin might have been right about the need to exterminate all goblins. The scene ended with a slow zoom-out, showing Zekken barely holding the sausage above his head, atop a massive mountain of piling bodies. The ground suddenly crumbled beneath their feet, breaking apart and leaving everyone suspended in the air as a massive explosion ripped through the area. It turned out that a rare ability in Skim Cholsu's armor, which had only a 1% chance of activating, had triggered, annihilating everything in the vicinity. As he plummeted toward the abyss, a system message flashed before his eyes, mocking him for destroying generations of goblins who had trusted him and awarding him a goblin point as a twisted reward. However, the original Gobleto leaped across the floating debris, catching Skim mid-fall and dragging him back to safety. When Skim opened his eyes, he was greeted by the goblin's goofy, loyal face with its tongue hanging out. Sighing, Skim muttered that the little bastard could have simply said he was hungry. He dropped the sausage onto the ground, and while Gobleto happily devoured it, Skim lay face down in the dirt, utterly exhausted. A notification appeared confirming the quest was complete, tallying a staggering 18,783 kills out of the required 30. Iron approached, noting with relief that the creature's rage had finally subsided, but she pressed Skim on whether he had caused the massive attack. When he defensively denied it, she clarified that she wasn't yelling out of anger, but concern. She pointed out that although the weak goblins hadn't permanently harmed the respawning players, he still owed the community for attacking countless innocent people. Skim groaned, admitting he already knew he had to make amends. Later, a group of adventurers arrived at the explosion site, wondering what had caused such a crater. Upon reaching the edge, they froze in awe, staring down at a glittering sea of loot generated by Skim's thousands of kills. The scene then shifted to a dimly lit conference room where a group analyzed the performance of Subject G67. A bald, bearded man confirmed that the subject had produced damage nearly hitting the theoretical limit of 1 million. Another voice explained that even the most sadistic criminals couldn't reach such numbers because human kindness usually weakened minions. Therefore, G67's lack of human consciousness made him the perfect vessel. Despite the heavy sacrifices involved, the group agreed that the experiment was a success and that, after countless resets, they had finally found their savior. The group continued their discussion, noting that Subject G67 possessed a connection to goblins far deeper than any other summoner they had previously tested. They feared that if someone with that specific power was left unchecked, he could eventually destroy everything. The bearded man agreed, stating that preventing such a catastrophe was exactly why the Iscariot organization existed. The narrator sarcastically observed that the man, likely named Paul, was doing a poor job of hiding his identity behind a black and white filter, as his shiny bald head was still clearly visible. Although the meeting's details were vague, it was evident that someone was pulling the strings behind the scenes regarding Skim and his goblin. Later, the scene shifted to Skim's home, where he sat slouched at his desk reviewing news updates about the incident in Albaster City. It appeared that Iron's strategy had succeeded. By distributing the loot to the gamers, the anger had subsided, and most people now believe the chaos was merely a scripted in-game event. Skim watched a TV interview where a player admitted that while he initially wanted to kill the person responsible, the treasure had satisfied him enough that he would settle for just punching the guy once. Skim sighed with relief, realizing how close he had come to disaster, and berated himself for ever trusting those green monsters. Rubbing his tired eyes, he reflected on the absurdity of his goblin going berserk simply because it hadn't been fed. He admitted that playing the summoner class without understanding its mechanics was becoming dangerous, and resolved to ask the female summoner for advice, noting that she seemed capable of controlling high-level creatures. However, he paused to question her motives, recalling how strange she had been from the start, calling him adorable and asking for his name out of nowhere. Chuckling to himself, he admitted she was cute, and briefly considered asking her out. He was so distracted that he failed to notice Sun Ryu standing right next to him, until the man's glare made him jump in terror. Sun Ryu calmly sat down, remarking that Skim looked troubled and that he was glad he had come to check on him. Annoyed, Skim fought the urge to slap the man's shiny head and asked if Sun Ryu had any idea how dire his situation was. When the older man knowingly replied that it was because of the goblin, Skim froze, completely caught off guard. He cautiously confirmed it was true but asked how Sun Ryu knew. Smirking, the man claimed it was obvious but added a worrying detail. Gobleto wasn't as immortal as they thought. He explained to the confused boy that the developers had found a bug in the summoner class and were patching it soon, meaning the goblin wouldn't stay powerful for much longer. Skim was struck with horror when it was suggested that his overwhelming power and that of his goblin relied entirely on a game bug. His panic intensified after he eavesdropped on two nearby players discussing an upcoming update, which reportedly included a specific fix for the summoner class. Devastated by the news, Skim vented his frustration in the game by furiously throwing rocks while his confused goblin watched. He realized that if the developers were patching the game because of him, he only had 1 week before his strength was nerfed. Refusing to return to his miserable life, he resolved to make millions of gold coins before the update went live. He approached Shin for a new assignment, but the man seemed unimpressed, remarking that killing 30 goblins was hardly a significant feat. Skim snapped back, clarifying that he had actually slaughtered 18,000 of them, and aggressively grabbed Gobleto's arm as if brandishing a weapon. Shin calmly told him to put the creature down, and revealed that the next quest required the player to be level 40. This news froze Skim in his tracks. He was currently stuck at level 37 and couldn't understand how exterminating thousands of monsters hadn't provided enough experience to level up. Confused and desperate, he headed to the Adventurers Guild to scour the listings for high-paying work. Unfortunately, all the lucrative jobs were taken, leaving only the Demon Mask quest. Although it offered a meager 10,000 gold, it was the highest level option available, so he decided to take it. However, as he reached for the board, his hand brushed against a glowing blue one. He turned to find Hai, the girl in the blue leggings, who immediately shrieked and accused him of being a pervert. Her scream drew the attention of the entire room, and the crowd quickly surrounded Skim, condemning him as a lunatic who deserved to die. Before the situation spiraled further, a level 32 mage named Okre stepped forward and snatched the quest slip from the board. When Skim angrily claimed he saw it first, the older woman told him to check his eyes and read the fine print, which stated that a minimum party of 3 was required. Skim was stunned by the restriction. He reluctantly agreed that Hai might be useful, but questioned why he needed the grandma. Okri smirked and challenged him to find a friend in the hostile crowd behind him. After glancing back and realizing that everyone despised him due to the rumors involving Catherine Lee, Skim sighed in defeat. He agreed to take the older woman, and despite Hai's horror, the system locked the party in place. A short time later, Hai delivered a powerful punch to a massive bear's jaw, knocking the beast to the ground. As she fought, she muttered under her breath, wondering why she was stuck partnering with that jerk again. From behind, Skim shouted for her to hurry up, complaining about her slow pace. Hai shot back defensively, arguing that she couldn't move any faster because the high-level monsters possessed an insane amount of health, and she asked sarcastically if he expected her to kill them in one shot. Skim let out a dramatic sigh, dismissing the enemies as nothing more than common mobs. Then with a smirk, he decided that since the developers were fixing the bug soon anyway, it didn't matter if people saw his secret weapon. He summoned Gobleto, and the green beast immediately charged past Hai to initiate the attack. However, Opre, mistaking the summon for an enemy, waved her staff and blasted it in the face with a massive fireball, shouting that she would handle the goblin. Skim snapped at her to stop getting in his way. Unfazed, Gobleto emerged from the smoke with glowing eyes and crushed the bear with a critical hit of 999 damage, killing it instantly. Everyone stared in silence until Hai, her voice trembling, asked what that goblin was doing there again. Skim crossed his arms and proudly explained that it was his summoned creature. When she expressed disbelief, he confirmed that he controlled the most powerful beast in the game, one capable of killing anything with a single blow. He advised her that it would be better if she didn't get involved and simply stood back to watch. As they ventured deeper into the cave, Hai chatted with the older woman, curious about why she played Gate of Heaven. When Opre smiled gently and admitted she had joined because of her husband, Hai became emotional, calling the gesture incredibly romantic and asking for more details about his character class. Before the old lady could answer, Gobleto suddenly stiffened. Skim looked up and announced that they had found the target of their quest. Hai gasped, realizing the strange entity before them was the Demon Mask boss, while Opre's expression darkened as she warned the group not to get too close. The narrative shifted to a flashback of Opre in the real world, tending to her husband as lie inside a VR capsule. She teased him, recalling how he used to complain about the machine taking up space, yet now he never left it. The old man chuckled, explaining that he got bored easily and used the game to have fun since his aging joints restricted his movement. He noted that, at least, the government was paying for it to help pass the time, a situation that felt both depressing and realistic. Later, the memory showed the moment Opre logged into the game for the first time. Her husband was shocked to see her, asking what she was doing there. She laughed, explaining she had borrowed a friend's headset because the world looked amazing. Although he criticized her terrible username, she simply pouted. When she asked how to see names, he told her to look above people's heads. Upon seeing his chosen name, she immediately blushed and called it ridiculous. The scene then cut back to the present moment in the game. The group found themselves face to face with a level 39 warrior bearing the name I Love Park Oak Ray. Skim stared in disbelief, realizing that the monster was actually the elderly woman's husband. While Hai shouted for the woman to stay back, warning that the creature was dangerous, Oak Ray stepped forward calmly. She apologized to her husband, telling him it was time to rest, and placed her hand on his chest. Channeling her magic, she detonated a shadow bomb at point-blank range. The explosion left Skim jaw-dropped, impressed that the granny was such a beast, but she suddenly dashed past him. In the confusion, the demonic mask detached from the warrior and latched directly onto Skim's face. Gobletto froze, terrified by the transformation, which was a bad sign. Meanwhile, Hai watched in confusion as Oak Ray carried her now human husband out of the rubble. Noticing that the woman's name was Oak Ray and the monster's name had been I Love Oak Ray, she finally understood the connection. As she stood there, momentarily distracted, Gobletto sprinted past her in a panic. Turning to see what had scared the creature, she was horrified to find Skim transformed into a grotesque, bloated elf hybrid that looked like a rejected design from a cursed AI website. Disgusted, Hai bolted away, regretting that she ever met him. Skim chased after her and reached for her shoulder, but she spun around and kicked him in the chin. The impact knocked the mask off, and he crashed to the ground. Hai realized that knocking the host unconscious removed the parasite, but before she could react, the mask shot through the air and attached itself to her. When Skim woke up groaning, he felt that the mask had done something strange to him. He looked around for the group and froze when he saw Hai towering over him, transformed into a hulking bodybuilder. He tried to sneak away, but she grabbed him by the collar and slammed him into a wall. Despite his pleas to talk it out, she punched him in the gut. Panicking, Skim used his rally command to summon Gobletto and used the goblin as a shield to absorb the blows, taking 0 damage. Realizing the mask completely controlled its host, Skim ordered Gobletto to smash it. As the goblin attacked, the mask detached from Hai mid-swing, dodging the blow. It tried to latch on to Gobletto, but simply bounced off his nose, seemingly confused. It then turned its attention back to Skim. Terrified, Skim sprinted away until he ran into the elderly couple. Breathless, he accused them of setting him up. Noticing their matching usernames, he confirmed they were family, which the woman admitted with a laugh. Furious at being tricked into the quest, Skim threatened them before charging forward, leaving the exhausted elders behind. Suddenly, the mask attached itself to Akai's face, causing her to drop her husband, who was barely clinging to consciousness. Skim skidded to a halt, relieved that the object hadn't targeted him this time. Opening his eyes weakly, the old man mumbled that Skim was a terrible person and that a young man should be willing to suffer for his elders. Skim immediately snapped back, retorting that it wasn't his job to suffer for free. He scolded the man for playing such a dangerous game at his age, pointing out the risk of having a heart attack in the middle of a fight. Just then, Hai and Gobolito ran onto the scene. Skim smirked, welcoming back minions number 1 and 2, but asked with genuine confusion how she was still alive after taking a hit to the head. Crossing her arms, Hai explained that he couldn't deal damage to party members unless he activated PK mode. Skim ignored the sass and asked if she had heard the news. The old lady had tricked them. Her goal had been to free her husband from the mask, but she had trapped them all in the process. Hai interrupted him with an odd question, asking if he secretly wished he were a goblin. When Skim stared blankly and called her crazy, she clarified that she didn't mean a weak monster, but a powerful one like his summoned creature. She asked if he ever dreamed of having that kind of strength. After a brief pause, Skim admitted that he sometimes did. Since his summon was powerful but never listened to him, he felt that life would be easier if he were the one with the strength. When he asked why she was bringing this up, Hai countered by asking how she had appeared while wearing the mask. Skim shrugged and described her as looking freakishly huge, with shredded muscles like a monster. Rolling her eyes, she clarified that she was talking about her physique, not her personality. She flexed her arm and explained her theory. The mask transformed the wearer into the version of themselves they truly desired. She noted that although she trained every day, she struggled to build muscle, though the narrator noted her blue leggings suggested she was already quite fit. She added that the old man disliked being small, which was why he transformed into a giant armored knight. Skim stared at Akai, half-jokingly wondering what the old lady wanted to be if the theory held true. Suddenly the ground began to shake. The old man trembled, and the woman seemed to disappear. Anxious to stop things from getting worse, Skim decided to rip the mask off her. However, the resulting transformation wasn't scary, but strange. The mask morphed the 80-year-old woman into a pregnant version of herself. Skim's jaw dropped at the realization that she wanted a child, noting how odd it looked despite her youthful spirit. The scene then faded into a flashback. Years earlier, the couple had received heartbreaking news from their doctor, who advised them to give up on conceiving. Disheartened by the diagnosis, they moved to the countryside, where the husband tried to lift her spirits with flowers and gentle reassurance. He told her that some people simply face harder paths, but they could still find happiness just by being together. Trying to make her smile, he joked that he would act like an immature son so she could care for him like the daughter she never had. When she was overcome with emotion, he wiped away her tears and promised to look after her forever. In the present, the old man's eyes filled with tears as he looked at his wife's transformed state, her hand resting on her swollen belly. Skim, however, saw the situation differently. He realized her pregnancy made her too slow to fight, presenting him with a perfect opportunity to flee. Hai immediately blocked his escape, refusing to leave the couple behind. She explained that the mask trapped its victim in a state similar to sleep paralysis, preventing them from speaking, controlling their bodies, or logging out of the dungeon. She insisted they had to save them, but Skim was already casually walking away. Hai shouted after him, asking if he planned to use the mask himself, but he dismissed the accusation, stating that they simply needed to find a way to destroy it. When he refused to help, Hai declared that she would claim the entire reward for herself. This stopped Skim in his tracks. She pointed out that the monster's name was written in gold, indicating a unique rarity that guaranteed incredible loot drops. Enticed by the prospect of a high-value reward, Skim grinned and told Gobleto to get ready. Hai eyed the whip in his hand suspiciously, but Skim insisted it was the only way to recover the mask. He knew the drill. Striking Gobleto with the blood whip would trigger berserk mode, and he could calm the creature down later with a sausage, resulting in nothing more than a temporary weakness debuff. Ignoring the goblin's terror, he struck, and a red glow consumed the creature. Skim pointed at the transformed woman and promised Gobleto a treat if he attacked her. The monster lunged, but because they were in the same party, he couldn't deal any damage and ended up uselessly tugging at her hair. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Skim groaned and decided to activate his goblin throw skill. Skim launched Gobleto like a fastball directly at the elderly woman, causing the goblin to spin in midair before landing feet first on her face. The impact knocked the mask loose immediately. Her husband rushed to her side, shouting her name, but thanks to the party's friendly fire settings, she was dizzy but unharmed. Skim muttered in frustration, realizing he couldn't use the goblin to stop the old man either, but Hai reacted quickly and urged the husband to grab his wife and flee. As the couple limped away to safety, Skim clenched his fists and vowed to destroy the unique monster the next time they crossed paths. Suddenly, the berserk goblin snarled and lunged at Hai. To Skim's astonishment, she sidestepped the attack perfectly, grabbed the creature's leg, and kneed him in the back. Although the strike dealt 0 damage, Skim was shocked that she could physically counter his unstoppable summon. As the drooling, exhausted creature struggled, Hai slammed her heel onto his head and followed up with a punch. Upon impact, Gobleto burst into blinding light, triggering a violent earthquake that shook the entire cave. Further ahead, the fleeing husband realized there was no escape. He softly confessed to his wife that he had forgotten his promise to care for her like a child as they aged, apologizing for the loneliness she must have felt following him into such a dangerous place. From a distance, Skim expected a miraculous survival, but the collapsing ceiling swallowed the couple whole. The falling rocks soon buried Skim as well, leaving him staring into darkness. Moments later, Hai called out to locate him, and Skim responded by sticking a dusty hand out of the rubble with a thumbs up. Letting out a shaky laugh, she explained that she was immobilized, but that the demon mask was trapped right beneath them. She told him he might be the only one capable of destroying it. Gritting his teeth, Skim agreed to take his revenge on the object. He managed to shift his arm just enough to strike it. A single hit dealing 18 damage caused the mask to crack and crumble into dust. Hai gasped as her level instantly jumped from 36 to 39, an experience gain equivalent to killing 30,000 goblins. She realized the monster hadn't actually been powerful, but rather its gimmicks made it seem impossible to defeat. Skim also leveled up to 41, but his excitement turned to disappointment when he checked his reward. He groaned upon discovering he had obtained the demon mask, a bound item that could not be sold or traded. Knowing he had to collect it before it vanished, he struggled against the debris. Suddenly, he felt heavy footsteps shaking the ground and saw a shadow looming over him. It was Gobleto. Panic set in as Skim realized his arms were pinned, making it impossible to reach his inventory for the sausage needed to calm the beast. Skim wondered why the creature was approaching him in the pitch darkness, hoping that perhaps it simply didn't recognize him. However, He soon noticed a terrifying detail. Gobolito's left eye was sliding out of its socket, stretching toward him like a worm. Before Skim could react, the eye latched onto his own and burrowed inside, causing both him and the goblin to scream in unison. Hai heard their cries echoing through the cave and turned just in time to see Skim reaching for the mask. Suddenly, a massive explosion of power blasted him across the chamber, dealing 9,999 damage and causing the wall to collapse. Emerging from the tunnel, the elderly couple looked confused but relieved, believing that the heavens had spared them. Meanwhile, Hai looked down from a ledge and noticed Gobolito crawling toward the mask, which puzzled her since he shouldn't have been able to pick it up. The scene then shifted to Skim furiously berating Hai, accusing her of being a lying thief for bringing the item there. Nervous and sweating, she defended herself by claiming she didn't realize unique items were untradeable. She had intended to give it to him, but now it was stuck in her inventory. Unimpressed, Skim unleashed a torrent of insults until the old man stepped forward quietly. He bowed and offered a pouch containing all their money as an apology for the trouble they had caused. Skim crossed his arms, pretending to hesitate until he knew the amount, but Hai interrupted, urging him not to take their last coins. However, the couple insisted they were quitting the game and throwing away their console to spend more time together. While Hai was touched by their sentiment, Skim greedily argued that they should hand over their savings so it wouldn't go to waste. Seizing the moment, Hai leaned in and whispered to the couple that they could actually exchange their in-game gold for real money, urging them to log out immediately while Skim was distracted. As the pair nodded and began to disconnect, Skim shouted in protest, but it was too late. Before vanishing, Hai playfully stuck her tongue out at him. Trembling with rage, Skim clenched his fists, veins bulging as he vowed to find that thick-thighed devil and kill her. Later, the narrative cut to a meeting between Skim and Shin. The NPC grinned, noting that Skim had already reached level 40 and wasn't as hopeless as he had initially thought. Shin observed that Skim looked stronger and decided it was time to teach him a secret. Skim groaned, annoyed by the impending monologue, and demanded the quest without the speech. Ignoring his impatience, Shin stated that he had been waiting for someone on his wavelength and began pacing as he recounted the history of a 1,000-year war between humans and demons in which humanity had emerged victorious. Shin recounted how the surviving demons and monsters had retreated into underground dungeons, securing a fleeting peace that inevitably failed because, without an external threat, humanity turned on itself. As they entered a chamber, Skim muttered impatiently, urging the man to skip the philosophy and get to the point. Ignoring the interruption, Shin calmly explained that people needed a target for their hatred to remain united. They paused in front of a massive cage holding a towering beast, which Skim admitted he had never seen in the city before. Shin pointed out that throughout history, cooperation only existed in the face of a shared enemy, which was why they kept such creatures alive to maintain the world's balance. Warning of an imminent war, Shin told Skim that he had to make a difficult choice where sacrificing many lives was the only way to save even more. While Skim grumbled internally about the solemn atmosphere and just wanted his mission, Shin announced his plan to recreate the ancient war, warning that the path ahead would be painful for both of them. He asked if the boy was ready, triggering a system prompt to either cooperate or refuse. Skim reasoned that accepting would obviously start the quest, but he was curious about the alternative. Despite Shin's insistence that he was needed, Skim smirked and clicked the refusal option repeatedly, only to find the button unresponsive. Sighing, Shin drew his sword and declared that cooperation was inevitable, slashing Skim across the chest before he could fully agree. Although blood sprayed everywhere, Skim was shocked to feel no pain. He mumbled that a level 70 character should have killed him instantly. He deduced that if he really wanted to refuse, his only option might be to defeat Shin. However, before Skim could tell his goblin to hold back, Goblito hurled a rock with full force. The strike dealt massive damage, causing Shin to collapse instantly. With his dying breath, Shin praised Skim's strength and the quality of the strike before fading away, leaving the boy dumbfounded and realizing he had just lost his quest giver. Later, the scene shifted to a desert where Skim tried to grind experience on giant crabs. Unfortunately, the area was crowded with mages, and every time he approached a monster, a lightning spell from another player would steal the kill. Clenching his fists in frustration at the overcrowded open-world dungeon, Skim felt the pressure mounting. With the patch for the goblin bug arriving soon, his window to gain power was rapidly closing. When a blonde mage furiously demanded to know who was stealing his kills, Skim didn't bother to argue. Instead, he simply smirked, activated PK mode, and took the level 44 player down in a flash. Despite grinding relentlessly for days and wiping out everything in sight, He had barely scraped together 1,000 gold, a realization that made him feel screwed. He grumbled that obtaining Goblito was supposed to be his big break, yet he remained broke. Recalling the bald man's warning about the upcoming bug fix, Skim felt as though his entire life had been cursed. Suddenly, a blow to the back of his head triggered a system alert, indicating he had been attacked, and everything went black before he could react. When he eventually regained consciousness in the town square, he found Sunryu standing over him. The old man scolded him for fainting in such a public place, noting that Skim should be grateful for the healing and asking if he had picked a fight with someone. Skim denied fighting, explaining that he saw a pop-up 1 second and woke up there the next, leading Sunryu to conclude that someone had killed him in PK mode. Furious that the world seemed out to get him, Skim slammed his fist down, but the old man cut through his anger. Sunryu asked what the boy was really chasing, reminding him that he had very little time left before the game patch arrived. The reminder hit Skim hard. He knew the bug that made his goblin powerful was about to be fixed. Deciding that revenge could wait, he muttered that he desperately needed gold and a quest. He asked what would happen regarding the NPC Shin he had killed, and Sunryu assured him not to worry because NPCs eventually respawned in their original locations. However, as Skim tried to leave, Sunryu stopped him to offer a reality check. He explained that while Skim's minion was arguably the most powerful creature in the world, raw power alone couldn't clear high-level dungeons filled with complex puzzles, traps, and mechanics that required more than brute force. He pointed out that even the best parties took days to finish them, meaning Skim was effectively stuck and wouldn't be able to reach a high-level dungeon before the patch deadline. Devastated, Skim clenched his teeth and began to cry, lamenting that his life was over because he was nothing without Goblito. Sunryu responded by smacking him, dealing 132 damage and causing Skim to stumble back in shock. Glaring at the boy, the old man told him to wake up and asked if he remembered the Evelton guild he had helped previously. He revealed that they were out there training every day to prove they could win again, pointing out that their goal was to surpass Skim himself, implying that he, not the goblin, was their true rival. Sunryu struck Skim once more to drive home the point that his value existed independently of Goblito, reminding the boy that he had always been the one others competed against. Rubbing his stinging face, Skim admitted he understood and shyly thanked the old man. Surprised by the gratitude, Sunryu chuckled and advised the boy not to say such things unless he was truly ready to stand by them. Meanwhile, Catherine Lee was in the middle of a live stream, complaining about a difficult challenge her viewers had forced upon her through a poll. She expressed her frustration at being asked to perform assassin-level feats when that wasn't her class. When her chat accused her of swearing, she feigned innocence, claiming she didn't even know any bad words. After switching into her powerful and sleek hyperspeed gear, she headed toward the same hunting zone where Skim had been grinding earlier. Upon arrival, she found the area strangely empty of monsters. A voice from the shadows informed her that she had entered a land of death where neither players nor beasts remained. The stranger explained that the zone used to be a peaceful place for cooperative leveling until a single individual arrived and began slaughtering every monster the instant they respawned. As blinding lights and massive damage numbers filled the sky, Catherine received a notification that her Take No Damage challenge was complete. The stranger gestured toward the scorched land, noting that nothing survived there, and told her to confront the perpetrator directly since he never hid. When Catherine turned to look, she froze in shock. The man responsible for the chaos, the same person who had attacked Kimchi Yonsu from behind earlier, was none other than Sungri. She whispered in confusion, unable to understand his motives. Suddenly, the pieces of the puzzle clicked together. Recognizing the shiny, egg-shaped bald head and the smug tone, she realized that Sungri and the blacksmith Humphrey were the same person. He was the one who had distributed the quests and leaked the secret dungeon information. Confused as to why he would attack Skim only to be seen with him later, she tried to shout a warning through her microphone, but Skim was too far away to hear. Back in the real world, her butler entered the room to report that the stream had cut out. Crossing her arms, Catherine declared the timing perfect and instructed him to hire a private investigator immediately, convinced that Skim was in serious danger.